Hello there, fellow seekers of the unknown. Before we dive into tonight's story, I'd love to know, what did you think of that conspiracy theory we just explored? Did it make you question what might really be happening in the skies above us? Or perhaps remind you of other mysteries you've encountered? What time is it where you are in the world right now? Are you settling in for the evening? Or perhaps it's the middle of the night and these revelations are keeping your mind racing through the quiet hours? I'm curious. What conspiracy theories or unexplained phenomena would you like us to investigate next? Are you drawn to the mysteries of ancient civilizations and their impossible technologies? The strange disappearances that seem to follow patterns no one wants to acknowledge? Or perhaps the whispered rumours about what governments really know about contact with non-human intelligence? Wherever you are, from bustling cities to quiet countryside, from Arctic tundra to tropical shores, you're part of our global community of truth seekers, and your voice matters in shaping the mysteries we uncover together. If you find yourself drawn to stories that peel back the layers of reality, that question what lies hidden in the shadows of our world, then please consider subscribing to Sleep Theories. We're building a community of curious minds who aren't afraid to ask the difficult questions and explore the possibilities that exist just beyond the edge of accepted truth. Now, let me tell you about Dr. Malin Voss and the day she discovered that the sky above us isn't as empty as we've been led to believe. The fluorescent lights in Building C of Virick's Defence Solutions hummed with the kind of persistent drone that made Malin Voss question her life choices on a daily basis. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March 2026, and she was alone in the data systems department, surrounded by towers of servers that processed more classified information in an hour than most people would see in a lifetime. Malin had been working as a data systems specialist for Virex for 3 years, a job that sounded important but mostly involved cleaning up digital messes left by Pentagon contractors who treated file organisation like a suggestion rather than a requirement. Tonight was no different, or so she thought. The corrupted archive had arrived in her queue that morning, labelled simply SOL-24-Warden, with a priority flag that suggested someone somewhere wanted it fixed yesterday. The file was massive, nearly 8 terabytes of what appeared to be personnel logs, requisition orders, and technical specifications dating back to the 1980s. But every time she tried to access it, the data fragmented, leaving her with nothing but digital noise. She'd been working on it for 14 hours straight, fueled by coffee and the stubborn determination that had gotten her through MIT and 3 tours with military intelligence before she'd burned out on the endless bureaucracy. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd left government work only to end up cleaning up after the same people in the private sector. At 2:51 a.m, something clicked. The restoration algorithm she'd been running finally found a pattern in the corruption, and the archive began to unfold like a digital flower blooming in reverse. What she saw made her sit back in her chair, her coffee growing cold as she stared at the screen. Personnel logs, hundreds of them. Names, ranks, deployment dates, mission parameters. But these weren't ordinary military records. The deployment locations included coordinates that placed them not on any earthly base but in orbit. High orbit. The kind of orbital positions that would require technology far beyond anything she knew existed. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through the files. Lieutenant Commander James Rivera, assigned to SW-7 platform deployment duration, 18 months. Captain Sarah Chen, transferred to Lunar Station Beta for non-terrestrial command training. Major Robert Kellum, KIA during Remnant Incursion event, coordinates classified under SAP-88 protocols. Non-terrestrial command. The words seemed to glow on her screen, defying everything she thought she knew about military operations. She cross-referenced the names in the Department of Defense personnel database. Nothing, not one of these people existed in any official record she could access. But one name kept appearing throughout the logs, Lieutenant Commander Halvan March. His signature was on requisitions dating back to 1987, orders for equipment that made no sense, gravitational wave thrust assemblies, plasma containment systems, biomechanical interface modules. The requisitions were approved under something called the Strategic Defense Initiative, but buried so deep in classified subprograms that even her high-level clearance barely touched the surface. Malin rubbed her eyes and looked at the clock. 3:23 a.m. She should have gone home hours ago, should have flagged this for her supervisor and let someone else deal with whatever rabbit hole she'd stumbled into. Instead, she opened a new search window and typed in Halvan March. The search returned 0 results. According to every database she had access to, Lieutenant Commander Halvan March had never existed. But his signature was on documents that were undeniably real, stamped with official seals and filed under programs that were definitely part of the government's black budget operations. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling tiles that had been the same shade of institutional beige since the building was constructed in the 1990s. Outside, the Virginia night was quiet except for the occasional truck rumbling down the highway that connected their industrial complex to the maze of defence contractors that surrounded Washington, D.C. like a metallic moat. The rational part of her mind suggested a simple explanation: bureaucratic error, misfiled documents, some kind of training exercise or wargame scenario that had been archived incorrectly. But the irrational part, the part that had kept her alive during her intelligence tours in places where official reports never matched ground truth, was screaming that she'd found something she wasn't supposed to see. She saved the files to an encrypted drive, then copied them to a second drive that she slipped into her pocket. Whatever this was, she wasn't going to let it disappear into the digital ether like so many other inconvenient truths she'd encountered over the years. As she gathered her things and prepared to leave, her computer chimed with an incoming message. The sender was listed as System Administrator, but the timestamp showed it had been sent from 3 time zones away, at exactly the moment she'd completed the archive restoration. The message contained a single line of text. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. Malin stared at the screen for a long moment, then deleted the message and shut down her workstation. As she walked through the empty corridors toward the parking garage, she couldn't shake the feeling that invisible eyes were watching her every step. She had no idea that her decision to copy those files had just made her the most hunted person on the planet. 3 days later, Malin was sitting in her cramped Alexandria apartment, surrounded by printouts and laptop screens that displayed fragments of the Solar Warden files. She'd barely slept since her discovery, driven by a compulsion to understand what she'd stumbled into. Every lead seemed to spawn 3 more questions, and every answer felt like it was wrapped in layers of deliberate obfuscation. She'd tried the official channels first, submitted queries to her supervisor about the personnel discrepancies, reached out to contacts in the Defense Intelligence Agency about the unfamiliar program designations. The responses were uniformly dismissive. The files were obviously corrupted, they said. Training scenarios mixed with real operations. Clerical errors that had snowballed over decades of poor record-keeping. But Malin knew the difference between clerical errors and systematic concealment. This felt like the latter. That's when she remembered Desmond Lake. She'd met Desmond during her last tour with military intelligence, when he was still working as a cryptologist for the NSA. He was brilliant, paranoid, and absolutely convinced that the government was hiding technological capabilities that would reshape humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. Most people dismissed him as a conspiracy theorist. Malin had learned to pay attention when Desmond started talking. 2 years ago he'd quit his job, liquidated his assets, and disappeared into the American heartland. She'd heard rumours that he was living off-grid somewhere in South Dakota, but finding him would require calling in favours from people she wasn't sure she could trust. It took her 6 hours and 4 intermediaries to get a phone number that might reach him. When she dialed, the call went through a series of relays that bounced her signal across 3 states before connecting to what sounded like a satellite phone. "Malin Voss," Desmond's voice crackled through the static. "I wondered when you'd call. You were expecting me? I've been monitoring the digital chatter. Someone's been very busy with some very old files. Files that were supposed to stay buried." Malin felt a chill run down her spine. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I helped bury them the first time, 22 years ago, when I was young and stupid and thought the people giving orders actually had humanity's best interests at heart." Desmond's laugh was bitter. What do you know about the Strategic Defense Initiative, Malin? The real SDI, not the sanitized version they taught in your military history classes. Reagan's Star Wars program, missile defense systems, space-based weapons platforms, most of it was theoretical. Most of it was misdirection. The real program had a different name, and a very different purpose. They called it Solar Warden. There it was. The name that had been haunting her for 3 days, spoken aloud by someone who might actually understand what it meant. I found personnel files, Desmond. Deployment records to orbital platforms that shouldn't exist. Equipment requisitions for technology that's decades ahead of anything in the public domain. Hold that thought, Desmond said. This line isn't secure enough for what you need to hear. There's a truck stop called Merle's Haven on Interstate 90, about 15 miles west of Wall, South Dakota. Be there tomorrow at 3 p.m. Come alone. And Malin, bring whatever evidence you've collected. All of it. The line went dead. Marlin stared at the phone for a long moment, then began packing. As she threw clothes into a duffel bag, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Her laptop screen, which she'd left displaying one of the Solar Warden files, now showed her desktop background. The file had vanished. She checked her encrypted drives. Empty. Every piece of evidence she'd collected over the past 3 days had been wiped remotely, as if it had never existed. But she still had the printouts. Whoever was watching her hadn't figured out how to delete ink on paper through an internet connection. Yet. 24 hours later, she was sitting in a booth at Merle's Haven, nursing a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime during the Clinton administration. The truck stop was a shrine to American highway culture, complete with chrome-plated big rigs and waitresses who called everyone honey, without a trace of irony. Desmond Lake looked like he'd aged a decade in the 2 years since she'd last seen him. His hair was longer and streaked with grey, his face weathered by prairie sun and whatever secrets he'd been carrying. But his eyes were the same, sharp, intelligent, and perpetually wary. He slid into the booth across from her, glancing around the room with the practiced paranoia of someone who had spent too many years in the intelligence community. "You look terrible," Malin said. "Living off the grid will do that to you, but I sleep better than I did when I was helping them keep their secrets." He pulled a tablet from his jacket and set it on the table between them. "Solar Warden. What do you want to know?" "Everything, starting with why my evidence disappeared." "Because you triggered an automated monitoring system that's been in place since the program began. The moment you accessed those files, every intelligence agency in the NATO alliance knew about it. The fact that you're still alive means they think you might be useful, or they're still deciding how to handle you." Desmond tapped the tablet screen, and a document appeared. It was heavily redacted, but Malin could make out fragments that made her heart race. "This is from a 1987 briefing to the National Security Council," Desmond explained. "The subject was extraterrestrial contact and the establishment of defensive protocols. Solar Warden wasn't designed to protect America from Soviet missiles. It was designed to protect Earth from something else entirely. You're talking about aliens. I'm talking about first contact that happened 40 years ago, and a subsequent arms race that makes the Cold War look like a playground dispute." Desmond swiped to another document. "The Volari made contact in 1981. They offered technology in exchange for cooperation in what they called containment protocols, for something they referred to as the remnants. Earth became a forward operating base in a conflict we barely understood." Malin studied the fragments of text she could read. References to fleet construction, orbital deployment schedules, personnel training for non-terrestrial engagement scenarios. It read like military planning documents, except the enemy they were planning to fight wasn't human. "The personnel files I found," she said, "those people are real." Were real. Solar Warden has lost more than 300 personnel over the past 4 decades. They're listed as training accidents, mechanical failures, disappeared during routine operations. The truth is they died fighting a war that officially doesn't exist. Desmond pulled up another file, this one containing what appeared to be satellite imagery. The timestamp showed it had been taken just 6 months ago. "This is Ascension Island in the South Atlantic. Look at the thermal signature." Malin studied the image. Even with her limited experience reading satellite photos, she could see the anomaly. Massive heat signatures rising from what should have been empty ocean, forming a pattern that suggested something large lifting off from underwater facilities. "How many ships are up there?" she asked. 8 that we know of, each one the size of a naval destroyer, equipped with technology that would revolutionize human civilization if it were ever declassified. Gravitational wave propulsion, energy weapons based on controlled plasma, life support systems that can function in deep space for decades. And they're fighting? They're maintaining a perimeter. The question is whether they're keeping something out or keeping us in. Desmond closed the tablet and leaned back in his booth. Outside, a thunderstorm was building on the South Dakota prairie, turning the sky the colour of old pewter. "There's something else you need to know, Marlin, about the people who've tried to expose Solar Warden before. The journalists, the whistleblowers, the military personnel who tried to go public. What happened to them? Some disappeared. Others suffered convenient accidents, but the ones that worry me most are the ones who came back changed, like they'd been reprogrammed." Melon felt ice water in her veins. "What do you mean, changed?" "I'll show you. There's someone you need to meet." The meeting with Bren Caldwell took place in a psychiatric facility outside Rapid City, in a visiting room that smelled of industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. Caldwell had been a Navy pilot, according to his file, top of his class at Annapolis, decorated for valour during operations in Afghanistan. In 2003, he'd been flying a routine training mission off the coast of California when his FA-18 Super Hornet had simply vanished from radar. For 6 months, he was listed as missing in action, presumably killed when his aircraft went down in the Pacific. Then he'd reappeared, walking out of the surf on a beach near San Diego with no memory of where he'd been, and injuries that didn't match a plane crash. The man sitting across from Marlin bore little resemblance to the confident pilot in his service photos. His movements were precise but mechanical, his speech patterns oddly formal. Most disturbing were his eyes. They tracked movement normally, but there was something missing behind them, as if the essential spark that made him human had been dimmed to barely perceptible levels. "Commander Caldwell," Melin began, using his former rank in hopes of triggering some kind of military reflex, "I wanted to ask you about your experience in 2003. "I was participating in a training exercise," Caldwell replied in a monotone that belonged in a computer, more than a human throat. "My aircraft experienced mechanical difficulties. The Navy report says you disappeared for 6 months. Where were you during that time?" For the first time, something flickered behind Caldwell's eyes, not quite emotion, but perhaps the ghost of one. His hands, which had been resting calmly on the table, began to tremble slightly. He paused, his face contorting as if he were fighting against some internal barrier. "I was selected for additional training." "What kind of training?" "Integration protocols. The interlock required calibration." His voice became strained, sweat beading on his forehead despite the room's chill. "We weren't guarding Earth. We were guarding a door." "What door?" But Caldwell's brief moment of clarity was already fading. His features relaxed back into their default blank expression, and when he spoke again, it was with the same mechanical precision as before. "I experienced mechanical difficulties during a training exercise. I do not have any additional information to provide." Malin tried a few more questions, but it was clear that whatever window had opened in Caldwell's mind had been firmly closed again. As they were leaving the facility, Desmond explained what they'd just witnessed. "Neural conditioning," he said, as they walked through the parking lot. "Not quite mind control, but close enough. They can't completely rewrite someone's personality, but they can create barriers, blank spots, automatic responses that prevent certain information from being accessed or shared." "How is that possible?" "The same technology that allows Solar Warden to exist. What we call biomechanical integration, the melding of human consciousness with artificial systems. The Valari shared it as part of their technology transfer, supposedly to help us interface with their equipment. But it has other applications." Malin thought about Caldwell's trembling hands, the way he'd struggled to speak about the interlock. He was fighting it. Whatever they did to him, some part of his original personality is still in there. which is why he's in a psychiatric facility instead of walking around free. The conditioning works better on some people than others. The failures end up diagnosed with various mental disorders and quietly institutionalized. They were interrupted by the arrival of a black sedan in the facility's parking lot. The car was unremarkable except for its diplomatic license plates and the woman who emerged from the passenger seat. She was tall, elegant, with the kind of understated confidence that suggested high-level government work. Her accent, when she spoke, carried hints of Eastern Europe. "Dr. Voss, Mr. Lake," she said, approaching them with a measured stride. "My name is Alba Jurek. I represent certain interests in the European aerospace community." Desmond's hand moved subtly toward his jacket, where Malin suspected he kept a concealed weapon. "How did you know we were here?" "The same way I know about Dr. Voss's discovery of the Solar Warden archives, and your subsequent investigation into the program's existence." Alba's smile was polite but somehow predatory. "I'm not here as a threat, quite the opposite actually. I have information that might help you understand what you've stumbled into." "What kind of information?" Malin asked. "The kind that explains why Solar Warden was never really an American program. Why the personnel files you found include names from 12 different countries. Why the funding comes through defense contractors that exist only on paper, backed by banks that have no official ties to any government." Alba opened a briefcase and withdrew a tablet similar to the one Desmond had shown her earlier. The document that appeared on screen made Marlin's breath catch. "The Continental Accord," Alba explained, "signed in 1996 by representatives of 38 nations. Not their official governments, their shadow governments. The people who really make the decisions about humanity's future." The document was dense with legal language, but certain phrases stood out. Non-human entity cooperation protocols, biomechanical technology transfer agreements, containment of hostile extrasolar species. "You're talking about a conspiracy involving almost every major power on Earth," Malin said. "I'm talking about the only conspiracy that actually matters, the one that determines whether humanity survives the next 50 years. Alba swiped to another page. Project DIONAE was the operational name for the technology transfer. The Velari provided gravitational manipulation technology, advanced materials science, and what they called consciousness integration protocols, the technology that allows human minds to interface directly with spacecraft systems. And in return, Earth became a forward observation post, a buffer zone between Velari space and whatever they're running from. The remnants. Marlin studied the treaty document, noting signatures from officials whose names she recognised from intelligence briefings. Deputy directors, undersecretaries, people who operated in the grey areas between official government policy and the realities of global power. "Why are you showing us this?" she asked. "Because the Accord is fracturing. Some signatories believe the threat has passed, that it's time to wind down Solar Warden and integrate the technology into civilian applications. Others think that would be catastrophically premature." Alba's expression grew grim. "And a third faction believes humanity has learned enough to no longer need Velari oversight. They want to take control of the program and use it for other purposes." Desmond finally spoke up. "Which faction do you represent?" "The one that thinks the public has a right to know what's been done in their name, and what's coming." Alba reached into her briefcase again and withdrew a small device that looked like a cross between a smartphone and a medical scanner. "This contains access codes to a secured network that monitors Solar Warden operations in real time. Fleet positions, mission parameters, communication logs, everything." She held the device out to Marlin. "But I should warn you, using this will definitely get you killed. The question is whether you'll learn enough before that happens to make it worthwhile." Malin took the device, feeling its surprising weight. The screen was dark, but she could sense sophisticated electronics humming beneath the surface. "There's one more thing you should know," Alba said as she prepared to leave. "The remnants aren't just some distant threat that might arrive someday. 3 weeks ago, Solar Warden detected a massive gravitational anomaly at the edge of the solar system. Something big is moving toward us, and it's not using any technology the Velari recognise." She got back into her sedan, leaving Marlin and Desmond standing in the parking lot with a device that might contain the keys to humanity's greatest secret, or its destruction. That night, in a motel room that reeked of cigarettes and desperation, Marlin activated Alba's device. Desmond had insisted on taking the adjoining room, paranoid about surveillance, and worried that whatever they were about to discover might make them immediate targets for elimination. The device booted up with no visible interface, instead projecting a holographic display that filled the space above Marlin's bed. The technology was unlike anything she'd seen in civilian or military applications, the kind of quantum computing breakthrough that would revolutionize human civilization if it ever left the black budget world. The main display showed a three-dimensional map of near-Earth space, with 8 distinct objects in high orbit. Each was marked with designations that matched the personnel files she'd found, SW1 through SW8, positioned in a defensive perimeter that covered every approach to Earth. The ships were massive, each one easily the size of a naval aircraft carrier, but sleek and angular in a way that suggested technology decades ahead of conventional spacecraft design. As she watched, data streams began flowing across secondary displays, communication logs, mission reports, technical specifications that read like science fiction but were obviously real. The propulsion systems alone would revolutionize space travel. Gravitational wave manipulation that allowed near instantaneous acceleration without the crushing G-forces that limited human space exploration. But what drew her attention were the recent mission logs, references to perimeter breaches, unidentified contacts beyond the heliosphere, and something called remnant probe encounters that dated back only 3 months. Using the credentials embedded in the device, Marlin accessed what appeared to be a live feed from SW7, one of the ships positioned on the far side of lunar orbit. The image quality was extraordinary, high-definition video that showed the curved surface of the moon in the background and the star field beyond. Then she saw something that made her question her sanity. Another ship was approaching SW7, but it wasn't human in origin. The design was organic, almost biological, with surfaces that seemed to flow and shift like living tissue. As it approached the solar Warden vessel, docking appendages extended from both ships, creating a connection that sparked with energy discharges. The timestamp on the feed showed this was happening in real time. Marlin watched in fascination as figures moved between the two ships. The human crew members were wearing what looked like advanced spacesuits, but their movements seemed too fluid, too precise to be entirely human. The beings from the other ship were tall, graceful, with elongated limbs and features that suggested an evolutionary path quite different from humanity's. This had to be the Valari. As the docking procedure continued, Marlin heard a sound that chilled her to the bone, her laptop powering down without her touching it. The lights in the motel room flickered, then went out completely. In the sudden darkness, the holographic display from Alba's device cast an eerie blue glow across the walls. Then that went dark too. The silence was complete for perhaps 30 seconds before emergency power kicked in, bathing the room in the red glow of backup lighting. Marlin's laptop screen was black, but when she tried to restart it, nothing happened. The machine wasn't just off, it was completely dead, as if something had fried its electronics from the inside out. She grabbed Alba's device, which seemed undamaged, and was about to check on Desmond when she heard voices in the parking lot outside. Multiple vehicles, doors slamming, the kind of organised movement that suggested professional operators. Through the curtains she could see black SUVs surrounding the motel. Men in tactical gear were moving with military precision, setting up a perimeter that would prevent anyone from leaving the building. Marlin grabbed her go bag and slipped out the back window of her room, just as the front door exploded inward. She could hear Desmond shouting from the adjoining room, then the sound of a struggle, then silence. She made it to her rental car and was pulling out of the parking lot when she heard the first gunshot. 3 days later, Marlin was sitting in a 24-hour diner outside Denver, trying to process what had happened and figure out her next move. The news reports about the incident at the motel described it as a drug raid gone wrong. 2 suspected methamphetamine dealers killed in a shootout with federal agents. No mention of Desmond Lake or the real reason tactical teams had surrounded the building. She'd tried calling Desmond's emergency numbers, but they all went to voicemail. Either he was dead, captured, or deep underground. Given what she'd learned about Solar Warden's methods of dealing with inconvenient witnesses, she wasn't optimistic about his chances. Alba's device had survived the electromagnetic pulse that killed her laptop, but she hadn't dared to activate it again. Whatever technology they were using to track the device's access was more sophisticated than anything she'd encountered. For now, it was her only remaining evidence that any of this was real. She needed allies, and she needed information. More importantly, she needed to understand the bigger picture. If Solar Warden was real, if humanity had been in contact with alien species for decades, then everything she thought she knew about the world was a carefully constructed lie. The answer came from an unexpected source: social media. She'd been scrolling through news feeds, looking for any mention of unusual military activity or unexplained phenomena, when she found a thread on an obscure forum dedicated to conspiracy theories. Someone calling themselves Skywatch 7 had posted a series of photographs taken with high-powered telescopes showing what appeared to be artificial objects in high Earth orbit. The images were grainy, but unmistakably showed large angular shapes that didn't match any known satellites or space stations. The poster claimed to have been tracking these objects for months, noting that they moved in formation and occasionally changed position in ways that suggested active control. More interesting were the responses to the post. Dozens of people from around the world claimed to have seen similar objects, or to have witnessed unusual aircraft that didn't match any known military designs. But what caught Marlin's attention were the replies that seemed designed to discredit the original post. Responses that were too coordinated, too similar in their language and arguments to be genuine. Someone was actively monitoring and suppressing discussion of these sightings. She created a throwaway account and sent a private message to Skywatch 7, suggesting they meet in person. The response came within hours: a set of coordinates in rural Montana and a time, midnight 3 days hence. The meeting location turned out to be an abandoned farm, miles from the nearest town and far from any sources of electronic interference. Skywatch 7 was a retired aerospace engineer named Marcus Webb, a man in his 60s with the kind of obsessive attention to detail that had probably served him well in his former career. "I've been tracking anomalous objects since I retired," he explained as he set up a sophisticated telescope array in the farmhouse yard. "Started as a hobby, but what I found made it something more important." Webb showed her photographs and video recordings that documented months of observations. The objects were definitely artificial, definitely in controlled orbits, and definitely using technology that surpassed anything in the public domain. "But that's not the strangest part," Webb continued. "The strangest part is the people who tried to stop me from investigating." He told her about the visits from government officials who claimed to represent various agencies, but carried credentials that didn't check out. About break-ins where nothing was stolen, but his equipment was subtly sabotaged. About former colleagues who suddenly became hostile when he mentioned his observations. "Then there are the ones who came back changed," Webb said, echoing Desmond's words from days earlier. "Changed how? I'll show you." 20 minutes later, they were sitting in a coffee shop in the nearest town, watching a man Webb identified as Dr. Richard Hale, a former NASA administrator who had been among the first to publicly discuss the possibility of extraterrestrial contact. Hale looked normal enough, well-dressed, articulate, engaging in what appeared to be a pleasant conversation with the woman sitting across from him. But as Marlin observed him more closely, she began to notice the same subtle wrongness she'd seen in Bren Caldwell. The precise movements, the way his expressions seemed to follow a script rather than arising naturally from emotion. He started investigating anomalous satellite data about 5 years ago, Webb explained. Gave interviews, wrote articles, was building a following among people who suspected the government was hiding evidence of contact. Then he disappeared for 3 weeks. When he came back, he issued a public retraction, claimed his analysis had been flawed. And now he's a perfect citizen, pays his taxes, doesn't ask uncomfortable questions, and occasionally gives interviews debunking the very theories he used to promote. Marlin watched Hale for another few minutes, noting the way he seemed to scan the room periodically, as if he were running some kind of internal surveillance protocol. When their eyes met briefly, she felt a chill of recognition. Not that she knew him personally, but that she was looking at someone whose humanity had been systematically diminished. How many are there? I've identified at least 30 individuals who fit the pattern. Journalists, scientists, military personnel, activists, anyone who got too close to the truth about what's happening in Earth orbit. Webb paused. The scary part is wondering how many I haven't identified. How many people in positions of influence have been adjusted. That night, back at the abandoned farm, Webb showed her his most recent observations. The objects in orbit had changed position, moving into a tighter formation that suggested preparation for some kind of operation. Something's happening up there, he said. Activity levels have increased dramatically over the past month. Whatever Solar Warden was designed to do, I think they're about to do it. As if in response to his words, the northern horizon suddenly lit up with an aurora display that was far too intense and far too far south to be natural. The lights danced across the sky in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, and within those patterns Marlin could swear she saw shapes moving, dark silhouettes that blocked out sections of the aurora as they passed. She activated Alba's device, and the holographic display showed her what ground-based observation couldn't. A massive battle taking place in high orbit, with Solar Warden ships engaging multiple unknown contacts that had appeared at the edge of the Earth's gravitational influence. The remnants had arrived. The leaked document appeared on WikiLeaks at 3:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 hours after the Aurora battle that official sources dismissed as an unusually intense solar storm. By morning, it had been downloaded over 2 million times before government pressure forced the site to remove it. But the internet is forever, and copies of the document spread across forums, social media platforms, and encrypted communication networks faster than any censorship effort could contain them. Marlin downloaded her own copy from a server in Iceland, one of dozens of mirror sites that had sprung up overnight. The document was labelled Project Umbra Warden, Operational Scenario Delta 7, and appeared to be a United Nations briefing paper, though stamped with classification levels that officially didn't exist. The content read like something from a science fiction movie, except that Marlin now knew it was terrifyingly real. The scenario outlined in the document was elegant in its cynicism. Manipulate global political tensions to justify massive increases in defence spending, with the majority of those funds secretly diverted to orbital defence systems. Create crises that required solutions only Solar Warden could provide. Ensure that humanity remained focused on terrestrial conflicts while the real war was fought in space. The supposed enemy wasn't Russia or China or any earthly power. The enemy was something the document referred to as the Remnants, described as a species of nomadic conquerors who had been systematically destroying civilizations across the galaxy for millennia. According to the briefing, the Remnants had already engaged Solar Warden forces in 3 separate encounters, each one closer to Earth than the last. The battles were described in clinical language that couldn't hide their desperation. 70% casualties in SW-4 crew complement. Gravitational weapons impact on lunar South Pole, secondary structures compromised. Emergency evacuation of Mars Theta outpost following containment breach. Mars Theta outpost. The document mentioned it casually, as if the existence of human installations on Mars was common knowledge. According to the briefing, the outpost had been established in 2009 as an early warning station and forward supply depot for Solar Warden operations. It had been overrun by remnant forces 6 months ago, with all personnel listed as missing in action. Marlin read the document 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of deception and manipulation. The scale of the conspiracy was breathtaking, not just the hidden war in space, but the systematic manipulation of human civilization to support it. Every major conflict of the past 4 decades had been engineered or escalated to justify defence spending that ultimately funded humanity's secret space fleet. But the most chilling section dealt with what the document called population management protocols. In the event that Solar Warden failed to contain the remnant threat, contingency plans existed for selective evacuation of key personnel to off-world facilities. The criteria for selection were coldly pragmatic: genetic diversity, essential skills, political reliability, and something called neural compatibility ratings. The rest of humanity would be left to face the remnants alone. Malin was still processing the implications when her encrypted phone buzzed with an incoming message. The sender was identified only as Phoenix, but the content made her blood run cold. Dr. Voss, Marcus Webb compromised. Extraction team en route to your location. You have approximately 12 minutes to evacuate. Trust no one in uniform. The real war is about to begin. She grabbed her go bag and Alba's device, then paused at the window to scan the surrounding area. In the distance, she could see headlights approaching along the rural road. Multiple vehicles moving fast toward the farm. 12 minutes had become 8. The black site beneath Thule Air Base in Greenland was a monument to humanity's capacity for self-deception. Built into the permafrost during the Cold War as a command bunker for nuclear operations, it had been expanded and modernised to serve as a detention facility for individuals whose knowledge posed threats to global security. Malin had been unconscious when they brought her in, waking up in a windowless room that was comfortable enough to suggest they wanted information, rather than simply making her disappear. The walls were lined with some kind of metal that blocked electronic signals. She'd tested Alba's device and found it completely inert. They left her alone for 18 hours before the interrogations began. The first visitor was a woman who introduced herself as Director Sarah Mitchell, though Marlin suspected that was as fictional as everything else about this situation. Mitchell was professional, almost maternal, explaining that Marlin had stumbled into matters of national security that required careful handling. "We're not the villains in this story, Dr. Voss," Mitchell said, settling into the chair across from Marlin's cot. "Everything Solar Warden has done, everything we've had to keep secret, has been in service of human survival. By lying to the entire planet about the most important discovery in human history, by preventing global panic that would have made effective defense impossible. Do you have any idea what would have happened if the existence of hostile alien species had been announced in 1981? The social collapse, the religious upheaval, the complete breakdown of international cooperation." Mitchell activated a tablet and showed Marlin images that made her question everything she thought she understood about the world. Video footage from what appeared to be the Oval Office, dated September the 15th, 1985. President Reagan was sitting across from 2 other men, one she recognised as British Mod liaison Elwyn Wraith, the other completely unfamiliar. The unfamiliar figure was tall, impossibly thin, with pale skin that seemed to glow with its own internal light. Its features were roughly humanoid, but elongated, as if someone had stretched a human face like taffy. When it spoke, its words appeared as subtitles at the bottom of the screen, apparently they're being communicated through some form of light-based language that required translation. "You will build the fleet," the subtitles read, "or they will arrive first." The conversation that followed was stilted, formal, like a diplomatic negotiation between species that had almost nothing in common except mutual necessity. The being, presumably one of the Velari, explained that the remnants were a nomadic species that consumed entire civilizations, stripping worlds of resources and enslaving or destroying their populations. "They move between star systems like locusts," the translation continued. "We have tracked their advance for millennia. Your system is next." Reagan's questions were practical, focused on timelines and capabilities. How long before the remnants arrived? What kind of defense would be required? What was humanity's role in this conflict? The answers were sobering. The remnants wouldn't arrive for decades, but their advanced scouts were already probing the edges of the solar system. Effective defense would require technology far beyond human capabilities, which the Velari were willing to provide in exchange for cooperation. Humanity's role would be as soldiers and support personnel in a conflict that spanned multiple star systems. "The treaty we negotiated that day," Mitchell explained as the video ended, "saved our species, but it came at a cost that we're still paying." "What cost?" "Autonomy, self-determination, the right to choose our own path as a species." Mitchell's expression was grim. "Solar Warden isn't really a human operation, Doctor. Voss. It's a Velari operation that uses human personnel. We provide the bodies, they provide the technology and strategic direction." Malin felt sick. We're client soldiers in someone else's war? We're junior partners in a defensive alliance that's kept Earth from being destroyed. The The Valari could have simply evacuated our solar system and left us to face the remnants alone. Instead, they offered us a chance to fight. And the neural conditioning? The people who come back changed? Integration with Valari technology requires significant mental adjustments. Human consciousness isn't naturally compatible with their systems. The conditioning ensures that personnel can function effectively while maintaining operational security. Mitchell leaned forward, her expression earnest. I'm going to show you something that no unauthorized person has ever seen. Something that will help you understand why everything we've done has been necessary. She led Marlin through a series of corridors that descended deep into the bedrock beneath the base. The architecture changed as they went deeper, becoming more organic, with surfaces that seemed to flow and pulse with subtle energy. This wasn't human construction, it was Valari. The final corridor opened into a vast chamber that took Malin's breath away. The space was filled with holographic displays showing star maps, tactical assessments, and real-time feeds from across the solar system. But what dominated the room was a massive three-dimensional projection showing what appeared to be the galactic spiral arm. Red markers indicated systems that had fallen to the remnants. There were hundreds of them, forming a wave of destruction that stretched across thousands of light years. At the leading edge of that wave, still decades away but moving inexorably toward Earth, were the advanced elements of the remnant fleet. 47 civilizations, Mitchell said quietly. Gone, not conquered, completely obliterated. No survivors, no refugees, no trace that they ever existed except radioactive debris where their worlds used to be. The scale was overwhelming. Each red marker represented billions of lives, entire species erased from existence by an enemy that seemed to view genocide as routine maintenance. The Valari are the only species to have successfully resisted them, Mitchell continued. Even then, they've been fighting a running retreat for millennia, trading space for time while they searched for allies capable of mounting an effective defense. And they chose us. They chose dozens of species. We're the only ones who survived the integration process long enough to be useful. Malin studied the display, noting the positions of solar Warden assets and what appeared to be similar defensive installations around other star systems. Humanity wasn't alone in this fight. There were other client species, other desperate civilizations that had accepted Valari partnership in exchange for protection. The Aurora battle 3 days ago, she said. That was them, wasn't it? The advanced scouts. Reconnaissance force. 12 ships, all destroyed, but not before they transmitted detailed intelligence about our defensive capabilities back to the main fleet. Mitchell's voice was heavy with exhaustion. We estimate 18 months before the first major assault. 2 years at most before they arrive in force. And you think we can win? I think we have a chance. Solar Warden has evolved far beyond the original treaty parameters. Human Valari integration has produced capabilities that neither species possessed alone. Our ships are faster, more maneuverable, more adaptable than pure Valari designs. Our personnel are more creative, more resilient, better at improvising solutions to impossible problems. Mitchell gestured toward another section of the display, which showed detailed schematics of Solar Warden vessels. The designs were clearly hybrid technology. Valari gravitic systems merged with human engineering, organic interfaces integrated with human neural patterns. But winning will require sacrifices that most of humanity isn't prepared to make. Complete militarization of our civilization, mandatory genetic screening to identify individuals suitable for neural integration, transformation of our entire species into something designed for interstellar warfare. Malin understood now why the secret had been kept for so long. The choice facing humanity wasn't between freedom and oppression, it was between transformation and extinction. The Valari weren't offering partnership so much as they were offering evolution, but evolution that would fundamentally change what it meant to be human. What happens to people like me, she asked, the ones who know but aren't suitable for integration? That depends on what you choose to do with the knowledge. Malin's escape from the Thule facility came not through her own efforts, but through what appeared to be a coordinated assault by forces she couldn't identify. She was in her cell, reviewing everything she had learned and trying to process the impossible choices facing humanity. when the lights went out and emergency alarms began blaring throughout the complex. The sounds that followed weren't quite right for a conventional military operation. Energy weapons rather than gunfire, the hum of advanced propulsion systems, voices speaking in languages that didn't sound entirely human. When her cell door slid open, she half expected to see Valari figures in the corridor. Instead, she found Marcus Webb, wearing some kind of advanced tactical gear that made him look like a character from a science fiction movie. "We need to move," he said without preamble. "This facility is about to be sterilized." Webb led her through corridors filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burned electronics. The Thule personnel they encountered were either unconscious or moving with the same mechanical precision she'd seen in other conditioned individuals. Whatever was happening here, it involved technology that could selectively target human consciousness. "Who's attacking the base?" she asked as they ran. "The people who don't think humanity should have to choose between extinction and slavery," Webb replied. "Turns out there's a third option, but it requires taking control of Solar Warden away from the Valari." They reached the surface to find the Arctic night lit by energy discharges from aircraft that definitely weren't in any human military inventory. The craft was sleek, angular, clearly based on Valari designs, but modified in ways that suggested human engineering influence. "Breakaway civilization," Webb explained, noting her confusion. "Solar Warden personnel who decided the treaty was a trap. They've been preparing for this moment for 15 years. The extraction was swift and efficient. Within minutes, Marlin found herself aboard one of the mysterious aircraft, watching Greenland fall away beneath them as they climbed toward orbit. The G-forces should have been crushing, but some kind of inertial dampening system made the acceleration barely noticeable. The pilot was human, but his movements had the same fluid precision she'd observed in the conditioned individuals. When he spoke, however, his voice carried emotions that the others had lacked. "Dr. Voss, I'm Commander Sarah Chen. According to the official records, I died in a training accident 6 months ago. In reality, I defected along with my entire crew when we learned what the Valari really intended for humanity." Chen explained the situation as they climbed toward the edge of space. The integration process that was supposed to help humans interface with Valari technology was actually a gradual conversion protocol. Over time, human consciousness became subordinate to Valari mental patterns, creating hybrid beings that were technically human but functionally alien. "The plan was to gradually convert our entire species," Chen said. "Replace human leadership with integrated hybrids, slowly transform our civilization into something compatible with Valari objectives. We were never meant to be partners, we were meant to be absorbed. But you broke free somehow. Some humans are naturally resistant to the integration process. Our neural patterns are too chaotic, too unpredictable for complete conversion. Instead of becoming integrated, we learn to interface with their technology while maintaining our human consciousness." The view outside the aircraft was changing from blue sky to star-filled void. Below them, Earth curved away in a vista that should have been breathtaking, but Marlin's attention was focused on what lay ahead. The Solar Warden fleet was visible as points of light in high orbit, but something was different about their formation. 7 of the 8 ships have declared independence from Valari Command, Chen continued. "We control the fleet now, along with most of the off-world installations. The breakaway operation was 3 years in the planning." "What about the remnants? If Solar Warden was the only thing standing between them and Earth?" "We're still standing between them and Earth. The difference is that we're fighting for humanity's survival, not for Valari strategic objectives. The remnants are real, the threat is real, but we don't have to become someone else's slaves to face it." Their destination became clear as they approached what had once been SW-3, one of the Solar Warden vessels. The ship was massive, easily a kilometre long, its hull a seamless blend of organic curves and mechanical precision. But now it bore new markings, human symbols integrated with the alien designs, suggesting a civilization that was becoming something new rather than something absorbed. Inside the ship, Malin found herself in a command centre that looked like the bridge of a science fiction movie, but operated by people who were recognisably human despite their advanced equipment. The technology was incredible. Holographic displays showing real-time intelligence from across the solar system, communication systems that could coordinate operations across interplanetary distances, weapons that could crack moons. But the people using that technology were making human choices, driven by human values, fighting for human survival on human terms. "The Valari aren't happy about our independence," explained Admiral Lisa Reese, the apparent commander of the breakaway fleet. "They've threatened to withdraw their support entirely, leave us to face the remnants alone. Or can we win without them? We don't know, but we know we can't win as their puppets. Better to die free than live as slaves, even if those slaves are technically still human." Reese showed Marlin the latest intelligence on remnant movements. The advanced scouts had been only the beginning. Long-range sensors were detecting massive formations moving through interstellar space toward the solar system. The main assault would begin within 2 years, just as Mitchell had predicted. "We're going to fight," Reese said simply. "With or without the Valari, with or without government support, with or without public knowledge of what's coming. Humanity deserves the chance to defend itself as a free species. What do you need from me? Tell the story. The real story, not the sanitized version the governments want people to hear. Humanity has a right to know what's coming and what choices we're making in their name." Malin looked around the command center at the faces of people who had risked everything to ensure that humanity's future remained human. They were preparing for a war that most of their own species didn't know existed, using technology that had been hidden for decades, fighting enemies that officially didn't exist. But they were fighting as themselves, not as someone else's idea of what humanity should become. "I'll tell the story," she said, "but who's going to believe it? Enough people will believe it to matter, and when the fighting starts, when the remnants arrive and the sky lights up with battles that can't be hidden or explained away, those people will be ready." 3 hours later, Malin was back on Earth, standing in the parking lot of a truck stop in Nevada, with a device containing enough evidence to fundamentally change human civilization. The official story would be that she'd suffered a nervous breakdown, that her claims about secret space fleets and alien alliances were the delusions of a disturbed mind. But the truth would spread anyway, through forums and social media, through whispered conversations and leaked documents, through the network of people who had always suspected that the world was not what it seemed. The first video went online 6 hours after her return. Raw footage from the Solar Warden Command Center, showing the fleet preparing for humanity's greatest battle. The debunking efforts began within minutes, but the video had already been downloaded tens of thousands of times. More would follow. Technical specifications, personnel testimonies, evidence that would be dismissed by officials but embraced by people who understood that sometimes the most important truths were the ones governments couldn't acknowledge. Marlin uploaded the final video just as the sun was setting over the Nevada desert. In it, she looked directly into the camera and spoke the words that would either help save humanity or mark her as history's most elaborate hoaxer. They're still up there, not for us, but because of us. In 18 months, maybe less, you're going to see lights in the sky that can't be explained away as weather phenomena or atmospheric disturbances. When that happens, remember that the people fighting those battles chose to fight them as human beings, not as someone else's idea of what we should become. That night, as she drove east toward an uncertain future, the aurora borealis appeared in the northern sky despite being far too far south to be natural. Within the dancing lights she could see shapes moving in formation, dark silhouettes that blocked out sections of the aurora as they passed. The fleet was still there, still watching, still preparing. Somewhere beyond the edge of the solar system, an ancient enemy was approaching with technologies that could sterilize worlds and patience that spanned millennia. But humanity would meet them as humanity, flawed, chaotic, unpredictable, and free. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen, but for the first time since discovering those classified files, Malin felt something that might have been hope. The real war was coming, but it would be fought on human terms. The truth was out there now, spreading through the digital networks that connected human consciousness across the globe. Some would dismiss it, some would embrace it, and some would begin to prepare for the battles ahead. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, ancient enemies continued their inexorable advance toward a species that had just chosen to fight for its survival, rather than surrender its soul. The sky above had never been empty, and soon everyone would know it. Hello there, fellow seekers of hidden truths. Before we dive into today's story, I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the mysteries that history forgot. If you enjoy exploring these forgotten chapters and alternative theories about our past, please consider subscribing to Sleep Theories. Your support helps us continue uncovering the stories they don't want you to know. But before we begin, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think about the conspiracy we're exploring today. Do you believe there's truth hidden in these alternative histories? Have you noticed any unexplained architecture or historical anomalies in your own area? And most importantly, what conspiracy or hidden mystery would you like us to investigate next? Your suggestions help shape our future episodes, so don't be shy about sharing your thoughts and theories. Now let's begin our tale of discovery, conspiracy and lost civilizations. The musty air of the Tartu Historical Archive carried the weight of centuries, each dust mote dancing in the amber afternoon light like secrets waiting to be discovered. Dr. Elian Marek had spent the better part of 3 weeks cataloguing forgotten documents in the university's basement archives, part of a modernisation effort that would digitise Estonia's most precious historical materials. It was tedious work, but for a historian and cartographer of his calibre, every yellowed page held the potential for revelation. Elian was 42, with the kind of weathered hands that spoke of years spent handling ancient parchments, and the sharp eyes of someone who had learned to read between the lines of official histories. His reputation at the University of Tartu was built on his ability to find connections others missed, to piece together fragments of the past that painted pictures far different from accepted narratives. On this particular Tuesday in September 2023, as autumn painted the Estonian countryside in shades of gold and crimson, Elian discovered something that would change everything he thought he knew about the world. The oak filing cabinet in section M7 had been scheduled for disposal, its drawers stuck with age and disuse, requiring considerable force to open. But as Elian wrestled with the bottom drawer, his persistence was rewarded when it finally yielded with a groan of protest. Inside, wedged behind a collection of 19th century land surveys, his fingers found something unexpected. A piece of parchment, carefully wrapped in oiled cloth. The material felt different under his touch, heavier than typical period paper, with a texture that suggested significant age. As he carefully unwrapped it, Elian's breath caught in his throat. Before him lay a map unlike anything he had encountered in 2 decades of historical research. The parchment was dated 1769, written in elegant script across the top, in what appeared to be a mixture of Latin and Cyrillic characters. But it was the content that made his pulse quicken. The map depicted a vast empire stretching from the frozen reaches of Siberia, across the Ural Mountains, through Eastern Europe, and remarkably extending tendrils of influence into what appeared to be parts of North America. At the centre of this enormous territory, in bold lettering that seemed to shimmer with gold leaf, were the words, "The Unified Technocratic Dynasty of Grand Tartaria." Elian had heard whispers of Tartaria in fringe historical circles, dismissed by mainstream academia as a misunderstanding of medieval references to various nomadic peoples. But this map suggested something far more substantial. The level of detail was extraordinary, showing not just political boundaries but infrastructure that seemed impossibly advanced for the 18th century. Intricate networks of canals connected major cities, while star-shaped fortifications dotted the landscape in perfectly geometric patterns. Strangest of all were the thin lines connecting these forts, labelled in the margin as energy conduits. The cartographer's signature was clearly visible in the bottom right corner, Aurelio van Kempt, Master Surveyor to His Imperial Majesty. Below the name was an elaborate seal featuring a double-headed eagle crowned with what appeared to be a stylized representation of the Aurora Borealis. Elian's hands trembled slightly as he photographed every inch of the map with his high-resolution camera. This was either an elaborate hoax or evidence of a civilization that had been completely erased from historical record. The implications were staggering. Dr. Marek. The voice startled him from his examination. Nadezhda Van, the archive's chief librarian, stood in the doorway. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that held depths of knowledge accumulated over decades of managing Estonia's historical treasures. Nadezhda, perfect timing. I need to ask you about something extraordinary I've just found. Elion carefully indicated the map without touching it directly. The older woman approached cautiously, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as she examined the parchment. Her face paled noticeably as she read the title. "Where did you find this?" she asked quietly, glancing around as if ensuring they were alone. "Bottom drawer of the cabinet in M7. It was wrapped and hidden behind other documents." Elion studied her reaction. "Nadezhda, do you know something about this?" She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers nervously adjusting her glasses. "Dr. Marek, in 37 years of managing these archives, I have seen 3 similar documents. All of them disappeared within weeks of their discovery." "Disappeared? How does a historical document just disappear from a university archive?" "The same way that researchers who ask too many questions about certain topics suddenly find their funding cut or their access revoked." She moved closer, lowering her voice. "There are subjects that some very powerful people prefer remain buried. The topic of Tartaria is one of them." Elion felt a chill that had nothing to do with the basement's temperature. "Are you suggesting there's an active effort to suppress information about the civilization?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you what I've observed." Nadezhda's eyes held a warning. "Dr. Penchev from Sofia University found a similar map in 2018. Within a month, his research was discredited, his university position terminated, and he suffered what his doctors called a complete nervous breakdown." Professor Martinez from Barcelona discovered references to Tartarian trade routes in 2020. Her laptop was stolen, her notes disappeared, and she received a generous offer to research medieval pottery instead. The weight of her words settled over Elion like a shroud. "What are you saying I should do?" "I'm saying you should be very careful about who you share this with, and I'm saying that if you're determined to investigate further, you should work quickly and quietly." She paused, studying his face. "But knowing you as I do, Doctor Marek, I suspect nothing I say will deter you from pursuing this." She was right. The map had ignited something in Elion that years of conventional research had never achieved. Here was a mystery that could rewrite history, and despite the warnings, he knew he had no choice but to follow where it led. "There's something else," Nadezhda said, reaching into her jacket pocket. She produced a small, worn business card. "If you're going to do this, you'll need help. Contact this person. Tell her I sent you, and mention the Aurora Protocol." Elion examined the card. It bore only a name, Dr. Inez Calloway, and a phone number with a European prefix. Who is she? Someone who asks the same questions you're about to start asking. Someone who understands that history is written by the victors, and that the victors often have very good reasons for ensuring certain stories are never told. As Nadezhda left him alone with the map, Elion felt the familiar thrill of standing at the edge of a great discovery. But beneath that excitement ran an undercurrent of apprehension. He was about to embark on a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the past, and based on Nadezhda's warnings, it was a journey that others had paid dearly for attempting. He carefully photographed the map one more time, securing the images on an encrypted drive. Then, with infinite care, he rewrapped the original and placed it in his briefcase. Whatever forces had worked to suppress knowledge of Tartaria, they were about to face a historian who had built his career on refusing to accept convenient lies. The hunt for the truth about the lost empire was about to begin. 3 days after discovering the map, Elion sat in his cluttered office surrounded by towers of books, printouts and photocopied documents. His initial research had yielded frustratingly little through conventional academic channels. References to Tartaria in mainstream historical texts were sparse and dismissive, typically describing it as a vague term used by medieval Europeans to refer to the vast, unknown regions beyond their borders. But the fringe sources told a different story entirely. Following a promising lead, Elion had tracked down the writings of Marcel Belloin, a Parisian architect whose work had been largely forgotten by mainstream historians. Belloin's journal, dated 1811, contained passages that made Elian's pulse quicken. The excavations beneath the Rue de Rivoli have revealed structures that challenge our understanding of Paris's development. We have found foundations of buildings that appear to predate known construction by centuries, yet their engineering surpasses our current capabilities. The metalwork shows evidence of techniques unknown to our modern smiths, and the stone construction displays our understanding of architectural principles that we are only beginning to rediscover. More intriguing still was Belloin's description of what he called the underground cities. It is as if entire urban centres lie buried beneath our modern Paris. The chambers we have uncovered show evidence of sophisticated power systems, with copper conduits running through the walls in patterns that suggest some form of energy distribution. Most remarkable are the domed structures, built from a single piece of stone so large and perfectly shaped that our contemporary methods could not duplicate the feat. Elian's search for more information about Belloin led him to a collection of photographs archived at the Bibliothèque Nationale. The images, dating from the late 1800s, showed excavation sites across Europe and even North America, where multi-storey buildings emerge from beneath meters of accumulated earth and debris. The photographs from St. Petersburg were particularly striking. They showed ornate Baroque facades partially buried in earth, with only the top floors visible above ground level. According to the accompanying documentation, city officials had dismissed this as the result of natural sedimentation over centuries. But Elian's trained eye noticed details that contradicted this explanation. The buildings showed no signs of gradual burial. Instead, they appeared to have been suddenly and uniformly covered, as if by a massive instantaneous event. Similar images from San Francisco told the same story. Photographs from the 1870s showed crews excavating what appeared to be grand municipal buildings from beneath layers of mud and debris. The official records described these as flood damage from the winter of 1861 to 62, but the scale and uniformity of the burial suggested something far more significant. As Elian compiled these images and accounts, a pattern began to emerge. Across different continents and cultures, the period between 1812 and 1816 had been marked by unusual weather, crop failures, and what historical records described as years of extraordinary atmospheric disturbance. The official explanation pointed to the eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815, but Elian began to suspect this was only part of a much larger story. The theory that began to crystallize was both elegant and terrifying in its implications. What if the early 19th century had witnessed not just a volcanic winter, but a global catastrophe that had literally buried an advanced civilization? What if the political upheavals of that era, the reshaping of Europe after Napoleon, the redrawing of territorial boundaries, the establishment of new governmental systems, had been not causes but effects of a much more fundamental transformation? The more Elian researched, the more evidence he found for what he began to think of as the Great Erasure. Maps from the early 1800s showed cities and regions that simply vanished from later cartographic records. Trade routes that had been established for centuries were suddenly abandoned. Technologies that had been documented in earlier periods were forgotten or dismissed as impossible. Most intriguing of all were the accounts of what contemporary sources described as mud floods. These weren't typical flooding events caused by rivers overflowing their banks. Instead, witnesses described sudden inundations of thick, viscous mud that appeared to come from the earth itself. The substance was unlike anything in their experience, neither fully liquid nor solid, but something that flowed like water yet hardened like cement once it settled. A Russian engineer named Pavel Volkonsky had documented one such event near Moscow in 1816. The earth seemed to convulse, and then the mud came. Not from any river or lake that we could identify, but as if the very ground was liquefying and rising up. It moved with purpose, flowing around some structures while completely engulfing others. When it finally settled, entire districts had vanished beneath a uniform layer of this strange substance. Most peculiar was how it seemed to target the oldest and most sophisticated buildings while leaving simpler, newer constructions relatively untouched. Elian found similar accounts from across Europe and even North America. The pattern was consistent. Advanced buildings and infrastructure were buried beneath layers of this mysterious mud, while newer, simpler structures were spared. It was as if the very earth was selectively erasing evidence of a more sophisticated civilization. But the most chilling discovery came in the form of government communications from the period immediately following these events. Documents from various European chancelleries showed a coordinated effort to rewrite history, to establish new narratives that explain the changed landscape without reference to the buried civilization. A dispatch from the Austrian Foreign Ministry, dated 1819, was particularly revealing. The successful implementation of the territorial rationalisation programme has exceeded expectations. The cartographic revision process has eliminated problematic historical references while establishing clear governmental authority over previously disputed regions. The burial events, while unfortunate, have provided an opportunity to establish more rational and modern administrative structures without the complications of pre-existing claims and traditions. The language was bureaucratic, but the implications were staggering. Government officials were describing the systematic erasure of historical evidence as a successful policy outcome. They were treating the burial of an entire civilization as an opportunity for political reorganisation. As Elian pieced together this hidden history, he began to understand why Nadezhda had warned him to be careful. He wasn't just uncovering academic curiosities or historical footnotes. He was documenting evidence of what appeared to be the most successful cover-up in human history: the deliberate erasure of an advanced civilization and the establishment of a new world order built on lies about the past. The question that haunted him as he compiled his research was simple yet profound. If such a civilization had existed, and if it had been deliberately erased from history, who had possessed the power and motivation to orchestrate such a massive deception? And more importantly, were those same forces still active today? Elian's investigation took an unexpected turn when he began researching the great world's fairs of the late 19th century. What had started as a tangential inquiry into the architectural capabilities of the Tartarian civilization led him to discover what he began to suspect was the most audacious act of historical deception ever attempted. The breakthrough came when he found a cache of documents in the Budapest State Archives, misfiled under Municipal Construction Projects Miscellaneous. The papers, dating from 1878, were internal memos between organisers of the Exposition Universelle in Paris. What made them extraordinary was not their official content, but the handwritten marginalia that revealed a very different story about the grand exhibitions that had captivated the world. One memo, signed by Exposition Director Henri Fournier, contained a notation that made Elian's blood run cold. The architectural assessment team confirms that structure block C7 predates our official timeline by at least 2 centuries. The construction techniques and materials are consistent with other recovered specimens. Recommend classification under Protocol 7. Public designation as period reproduction, pending final disposition. Protocol 7. The phrase appeared repeatedly throughout the documents, always in reference to buildings that seemed to pose some kind of classificatory problem. As Elian traced these references, a disturbing pattern emerged. Many of the most magnificent structures at the world's fairs, the soaring palaces, the impossibly grand pavilions, the architectural marvels that visitors assumed had been constructed specifically for the exhibitions, had actually been pre-existing buildings, remnants of the buried Tartarian civilization. The evidence was overwhelming once he knew what to look for. Construction timelines that made no sense for the scale of the buildings. Architectural techniques that supposedly didn't exist until decades later. Most tellingly, photographs from the construction phase showed workers not building the structures, but excavating them from beneath layers of accumulated earth and debris. The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago provided even more damning evidence. Elian obtained copies of private correspondence between exposition organisers and a mysterious entity referred to only as the Commission. The letters, written in careful diplomatic language, revealed a systematic effort to repurpose discovered Tartarian architecture for the fair, while maintaining strict secrecy about the building's true origins. Daniel Burnham, the exposition's chief architect, had written to Commission Representative Marcus Whitmore. The structures in Grid Section 12 have been successfully integrated into the exposition design. Public documentation will reflect our architectural team's vision, as per established protocols. The advanced engineering principles observed in the original construction have been attributed to innovative American ingenuity. Several technical features have been deemed too sophisticated for public display and have been modified or concealed accordingly. But the most shocking discovery came in the form of a blueprint marked TRS Protocol Total Reimaging System, dated 1902 and bearing the insignia of what appeared to be a secret council operating under the auspices of the League of Nations. The document outlined a comprehensive program for managing architectural anomalies at international exhibitions. The TRS protocol was chillingly systematic. It provided detailed procedures for identifying and securing structures that predated official historical timelines, developing cover stories that attributed advanced engineering to contemporary innovation, managing information flow to prevent public recognition of technological inconsistencies, coordinating with media outlets to ensure appropriate narrative framing, planning for the systematic demolition of problematic structures following exhibitions. The protocol's introduction stated its purpose with bureaucratic clarity. The maintenance of historical coherence requires careful management of architectural evidence that might suggest technological capabilities inconsistent with established developmental timelines. The temporary nature of international exhibitions provides an ideal framework for public display of recovered structures, while maintaining narrative control through planned obsolescence. Elian realised he was looking at evidence of a decades-long campaign to display the remnants of Tartarian civilization to the public, while simultaneously concealing their true significance. The world's fairs had been elaborate exercises in hiding truth in plain sight, allowing people to marvel at impossible architecture while being told it represented the height of contemporary achievement. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. Fair after fair had featured buildings whose construction was supposedly cutting edge, yet which displayed engineering principles and artistic sophistication that wouldn't be officially discovered for decades. The public had been invited to celebrate human progress, while unknowingly viewing the remnants of a civilization that had been systematically erased from their history. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation came from a series of letters between commission agents and various government officials. The correspondence revealed that the demolition of these magnificent structures at the end of each fair wasn't just part of the normal clean-up process. It was a deliberate destruction of evidence. A telegram from Commission Director Jonathan Aldrich to Chicago Mayor Carter Harrison Sr., dated November 1893, was particularly chilling. Demolition of sections 7 through 12 must proceed according to accelerated timeline. Recent public inquiries regarding construction techniques require immediate evidence elimination. Standard fire protocols authorized if mechanical demolition proves insufficient. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871, Elian realized with growing horror, might not have been the accident historians had assumed. Coming just 2 years before the exposition, it had conveniently cleared vast areas of the city where Tartarian ruins might have been uncovered during normal urban development. The timing was too perfect, the scope too comprehensive to be mere coincidence. As Elian delved deeper into the archives, he found evidence that similar accidents had struck other cities where World's Fairs were planned. The Great Boston Fire of 1872, the Great Seattle Fire of 1889, the catastrophic fires that had swept through dozens of American cities in the late 19th century, all had occurred in areas where subsequent excavations for exposition construction had revealed impossible architecture. The pattern was clear. Discover Tartarian ruins, display them as contemporary marvels, then destroy the evidence and blame natural disasters for any inconvenient questions. It was a strategy that had been repeated across continents in decades, orchestrated by an organisation with the resources and influence to manipulate governments, media, and public perception on a global scale. But who was the Commission, and how had they managed to maintain such control over historical narrative for more than a century? The answer to that question would prove to be even more disturbing than the evidence of the cover-up itself. Dr. Elian Marrick's research took a decidedly more technical turn when he began investigating the mysterious energy conduits marked on the original Tartarian map. What he discovered challenged not only historical understanding but fundamental assumptions about technological development and the capabilities of pre-industrial civilizations. The breakthrough came through an unlikely source: Dr. Lev Oronov, a Russian electrical engineer whose posthumously published papers had been largely ignored by the academic community. Oronov had died in 1987, but his research notes, preserved in the archives of the Moscow Institute of Technology, contained observations that suddenly made perfect sense in the context of Elian's investigation. Oronov had spent the later years of his career studying what he called architectural anomalies in Russian Orthodox cathedrals and municipal buildings constructed before 1850. His notes described structural elements that seemed to have no purely architectural function, but showed characteristics consistent with advanced electrical engineering. The spires and towers of these structures, Oronov had written, show evidence of purposeful metal integration that cannot be explained by purely aesthetic or structural considerations. Copper and iron components are woven through the stonework in patterns that suggest deliberate electromagnetic design. Most significantly, many of these buildings show evidence of having been constructed around pre-existing metallic frameworks of extraordinary sophistication. Intrigued by these observations, Elian began examining photographs and architectural plans of buildings that had been constructed on sites where Tartarian ruins had been discovered. The pattern Oronov had identified became clear. These structures weren't just built on top of Tartarian foundations, they had been built around and incorporated Tartarian technology that the builders didn't fully understand. The star forts that appeared on the original map provided the most compelling evidence. These geometric structures, found across continents in locations that official history claimed had never been in contact with each other, all shared identical design principles. They were positioned at precise intervals that corresponded to what geologists called telluric currents, naturally occurring electrical phenomena that flowed through the Earth's crust. But more than just positioning, the forts themselves appeared to have been designed to interact with these currents. Ground-penetrating radar surveys, conducted by various geological teams over the years, had revealed that the star forts contained complex underground networks of metal conduits, crystalline chambers, and what appeared to be sophisticated resonance devices. Dr. Sarah Blackwood, a geophysicist at Cambridge, had published a paper in 2019 describing electromagnetic anomalies at star fort sites across Europe. Her findings, though published in a respected journal, had attracted little attention from the broader academic community. But reading her work in the context of Tartarian research, Elian realised she had documented evidence of a continent-spanning energy grid. The electromagnetic signatures at these sites, Blackwood had written, suggest the presence of artificial structures designed to harness and redirect naturally occurring electrical phenomena. The sophistication of the apparent design exceeds anything in contemporary technology. If these structures are indeed human-made, they represent an understanding of electromagnetic principles that we are only beginning to develop. Elian contacted Dr. Blackwood, carefully introducing himself and his research without revealing the full scope of his investigation. Her response was immediate and intriguing. "Dr. Marek, I've been hoping someone would ask these questions. The electromagnetic patterns I've been documenting suggest a coordinated system of unprecedented scope and sophistication. But every time I've tried to publish more detailed findings, I've encountered unusual resistance from both funding agencies and peer reviewers. There are clearly aspects of this phenomenon that some people prefer remain unstudied." Through Blackwood's contacts, Elian gained access to electromagnetic surveys from star fort sites across 3 continents. The data was remarkable. Each fort showed evidence of structures designed to collect, concentrate and transmit electrical energy across vast distances. The network appeared to have been capable of wireless power transmission on a scale that modern technology was only beginning to approach. But the most extraordinary discovery came when Elian managed to examine one of Oronov's resonator devices in person. The Russian engineer had reportedly recovered several of these artifacts from decommissioned Orthodox cathedrals before his death. One device had ended up in the collection of the Hermitage Museum, catalogued simply as decorative metalwork, origin unknown, approximately 18th century. The object was unlike anything Elian had ever seen. About the size of a large book, it appeared to be made from a single piece of metal that showed no evidence of welding, casting, or any other manufacturing process. The surface was covered with intricate geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow as he examined them from different angles. Most remarkably, the metal itself seemed to contain multiple elements, in combinations that contemporary metallurgy couldn't reproduce. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a material scientist at Tokyo University, who agreed to examine photographs and spectroscopic data from the device, was blunt in his assessment. The alloy composition you've documented is impossible, according to our current understanding of metallurgy. The elements appear to be bonded at a molecular level, in ways that our technology cannot achieve. The geometric patterns show evidence of precision manufacturing beyond our current capabilities. This object, if authentic, represents technology that we don't yet understand. But the device's most extraordinary property became apparent when Elion was allowed to observe it during a thunderstorm. As lightning flashed outside the museum, the geometric patterns on the device began to glow with a soft, pulsing light. The effect lasted for several minutes after the storm passed, suggesting the object was somehow storing and releasing electromagnetic energy. This led Elian to a stunning realization. The Tartarian civilization hadn't just been advanced in conventional terms. They had developed technology that worked in harmony with natural electromagnetic phenomena, creating a power grid that used the Earth itself as a conductor. The star forts weren't just military installations or administrative centres. They were nodes in a global energy network that had provided power to an entire civilization without the need for fuel, combustion, or the environmental destruction that characterized modern energy production. The implications were staggering. If such technology had existed and been deliberately suppressed, it represented not just historical fraud, but active sabotage of human technological development. Someone had chosen to bury free, clean energy technology in favour of systems that required centralised control and environmental exploitation. As Elian compiled his evidence, he began to understand why the Tartarian civilization had been so thoroughly erased from history. It wasn't just about political control or territorial claims. It was about maintaining a technological paradigm that ensured the dependence of populations on centralised authority. The Tartarian energy grid had represented something far more dangerous to establish power structures than advanced architecture or sophisticated governance. It had represented technological independence. The question that haunted Elian was whether any of this technology had survived the systematic destruction. If even fragments of the Tartarian energy system remained hidden or forgotten, they could revolutionize human civilization, but they could also represent an existential threat to every industry, government and power structure that depended on humanity's continued dependence on centralized controllable energy sources. The breakthrough that would either vindicate Elian's research or seal his fate came through an encrypted message from Dr. Inez Calloway, the mysterious contact Nadezhda had provided. After weeks of careful correspondence, building trust through the exchange of increasingly sensitive information, Calloway finally revealed why she had agreed to help him. "I've been tracking the suppression of Tartarian evidence for 15 years, she wrote. "My father was one of the researchers who disappeared in the 1980s after getting too close to the truth. But I have something that even the Commission doesn't know about: direct access to what might be the last intact Tartarian archive." The archive, according to Calloway, was hidden in a sealed underground chamber beneath the Ural Mountains, designated ARKVY in declassified Soviet documents. During the 1960s, Soviet mining operations had accidentally breached the chamber while excavating for a military installation. The discovery had been immediately classified at the highest levels, with all evidence of the find buried in bureaucratic secrecy. But Calloway's father, Dr. James Calloway, had been part of the original investigative team. Before his disappearance, he had managed to document the chamber's location and create detailed maps of its contents. Those maps had been Inez's inheritance and her obsession for the past decade and a half. The chamber contains materials that prove everything you've been investigating, her message continued. But more than that, it contains evidence of what really happened to the Tartarian civilization, and who was responsible for its destruction. If you're serious about exposing this conspiracy, Archivo Ice is where we'll find the proof that even they can't deny or suppress. The journey to the Ural Mountains required careful planning and considerable risk. Calloway had connections within the Russian Ministry of Cultural Affairs who could provide legitimate research credentials, but accessing the site would require them to pose as geologists investigating mineral deposits. The slightest suspicion would result in immediate arrest and detention, with no guarantee that either of them would ever be seen again. Elian knew he was crossing a line from which there would be no return, but the evidence he had compiled over the past months painted a picture so significant and so thoroughly suppressed that he felt morally obligated to pursue the truth regardless of personal risk. The chamber itself was accessible through a maintenance tunnel in the abandoned Seveny mining complex, about 200 kilometres northeast of Yekaterinburg. Calloway's contact, a regional mining supervisor named Viktor Petrov, agreed to provide access in exchange for a substantial bribe and absolute assurance that his involvement would never be revealed. The descent into Arc 6 took place on a frigid November night, with temperatures dropping well below freezing and a brutal wind howling across the Ural peaks. Elian and Calloway, equipped with professional geological equipment to maintain their cover story, followed Petrov through a maze of abandoned tunnels that seemed to burrow endlessly into the mountain's heart. The chamber, when they finally reached it, was unlike anything Elian had imagined. The space was vast, easily the size of a cathedral, carved from living rock with a precision that suggested advanced tools and engineering knowledge. But it was the contents that took his breath away. The walls were lined with metal shelving that held thousands of books, scrolls, maps and documents, all preserved in the mountain's stable, cool environment. "My God," Calloway whispered, her voice echoing in the enormous space. "It's all still here." The materials they examined over the next several hours painted a picture of the Tartarian civilization that exceeded even Elian's most optimistic theories. The preserved manuscripts described a global society based on principles of technological harmony with natural systems, sustainable resource management, and decentralized governance that eliminated the need for oppressive central authority. One volume, bound in a material that felt like leather but showed no signs of age despite apparent centuries of existence, contained detailed schematics for the energy grid system. The technology was elegant in its simplicity, yet sophisticated beyond contemporary understanding. The Tartarians had developed methods for tapping into the Earth's natural electromagnetic field, storing that energy in crystalline matrices, and distributing it through networks of conducting materials embedded in architectural structures. But it was another volume that revealed the true scope of the historical conspiracy they had uncovered. Written in multiple languages and clearly intended as a comprehensive record, it documented the systematic destruction of Tartarian civilization by what the authors called the Coalition of Shadows. The Coalition, according to these documents, had been a secret alliance of European royal houses, emerging industrial interests, and religious authorities who had recognized that Tartarian technology and social organization represented an existential threat to their power structures. The decentralized energy grid made populations independent of centralized control. The sustainable resource management eliminated scarcity-based economic manipulation. The distributed governance model made traditional monarchical and religious authority irrelevant. The solution, as documented in chilling detail, had been systematic genocide followed by historical erasure. The mud floods that Elian had researched weren't natural disasters but deliberate attacks using weaponized geological manipulation. The Coalition had developed methods for triggering localized liquefaction events that could bury entire cities while leaving surrounding areas untouched. The technology was crude compared to Tartarian engineering, but effective for its intended purpose of destruction. The final entry in the record, dated according to the Tartarian calendar as year 7412, approximately 1816 in the Gregorian system, was written in a shaking hand that suggested its author was among the last survivors. The Coalition's final assault has succeeded where years of conventional warfare failed. Our cities lie buried, our people scattered or murdered, our knowledge suppressed. But the Earth remembers what they have destroyed, and the stars still sing the frequencies of our power grid. We did not vanish, we were buried. But the Earth remembers, and someday someone will listen to what it has to tell them. As Elion photographed page after page of evidence, he realized he was documenting not just historical fraud, but active crimes against humanity that had continued for centuries. The suppression of Tartarian technology had condemned humanity to environmental destruction, economic manipulation, and political oppression that could have been avoided. But as they prepared to leave the chamber, Calloway noticed something that chilled them both. Fresh footprints in the dust near the entrance, prints that hadn't been there when they arrived. "We need to leave," she said quietly. "Now." As they gathered their equipment and documentation, Elion took one last look around the chamber that contained proof of humanity's hidden heritage. Whatever happened next, the truth was finally emerging from centuries of suppression. But as they made their way back through the tunnels toward the surface, both researchers realized that exposing this conspiracy would require more than academic publications or scholarly presentations. They were challenging forces that had successfully hidden the truth for 2 centuries and had eliminated anyone who posed a threat to their control. The race between revelation and suppression was about to begin. The systematic destruction of Dr. Elion Marek's research began within 48 hours of his return from the Ural Mountains. His university access was revoked due to budget restructuring. His research files were corrupted by what IT specialists described as unprecedented system failures. The photographs and documentation from ARKV-OR, despite being stored on multiple encrypted drives, were somehow corrupted or entirely deleted. By the end of the week, Interpol had issued a warrant for Marek's arrest on charges of illegal border crossing and theft of Russian cultural artifacts. The man who had spent months meticulously documenting the greatest cover-up in human history had become a fugitive from the very forces he had sought to expose. Dr. Inez Calloway managed to evade the initial dragnet, but her communications with Elion were being monitored. Their last encrypted conversation was brief and desperate. "They're moving faster than we anticipated," she wrote. "The Commission has resources we underestimated, but I've managed to upload fragments of our documentation to distributed servers. Even if they silence us, pieces of the truth will survive." Elion's final message was characteristically defiant. "The evidence is undeniable. Tartaria existed. They destroyed it. They've hidden the truth for 2 centuries, but you can't bury reality forever. Someone will connect the dots." 3 days later, Dr. Elion Marek disappeared. The official story, released simultaneously by Estonian authorities and international law enforcement, was that he had suffered a complete psychological breakdown following academic fraud allegations and had fled to avoid prosecution. His research was described as elaborate fantasy created by a brilliant but disturbed mind-seeking attention through increasingly outlandish claims. Nadezhda Devan found her archive access revoked and her pension suspended pending investigation of security breaches. Viktor Petrov, the mining supervisor who had provided access to ARKVI, died in what authorities described as an industrial accident at a construction site 400 kilometers from the Ural Mountains. But Inez Calloway had been true to her word. In the weeks following Elion's disappearance, fragments of their research began appearing on obscure forums, alternative history websites, and conspiracy theory channels. The information was scattered, incomplete, and mixed with enough disinformation to make verification difficult. But for those who knew what to look for, the truth was there. 6 months after Elion's disappearance, a video appeared on a small YouTube channel called Hidden Frequencies. The upload lasted exactly 1 hour before being removed for violation of community guidelines. But in that hour, tens of thousands of viewers watched grainy footage of the ARKVI chamber, saw photographs of impossible architecture from the world's fairs, and heard a distorted voice reading passages from Tartarian manuscripts. The voice was unmistakably Elion Marek's, though electronically altered to mask its source. They want you to believe that human civilization developed slowly, painfully, through centuries of gradual progress. They want you to accept that environmental destruction, economic inequality, and technological dependence are inevitable prices of advancement. But that's a lie designed to keep you from asking the most dangerous question of all. What if there was another way? The video continued with systematic presentation of evidence that the mainstream academic world had dismissed or ignored. Star forts aligned with electromagnetic grid patterns. World's Fair buildings that couldn't have been constructed with period technology. Government documents describing the systematic suppression of historical evidence. And finally, footage from AR cave viewers showing shelves of preserved manuscripts that proved an advanced civilization had been deliberately erased from human memory. You're not supposed to ask about Tartaria, the distorted voice concluded, but the ruins are still standing, hidden in plain sight. The energy grid still pulses beneath our feet, waiting for someone to remember how to listen. They buried our past, but they couldn't kill the truth. Just look up at the impossible architecture they claim was built by primitive peoples. Then look deeper and ask yourself why they're so desperate to keep you from remembering what we once were. The video's final frame showed coordinates for locations around the world where Tartarian structures could still be found by those willing to look beyond official explanations. Within minutes of the video's removal, mirrors began appearing on alternative platforms. The coordinates led investigators to sites in Russia, China, Europe, and North America, where unexplained architecture displayed the characteristic signs of Tartarian engineering. Ground-penetrating radar revealed the telltale signatures of buried buildings and technological infrastructure. A grassroots movement began to emerge. Independent researchers, amateur archaeologists, and curious citizens started documenting anomalies in their local areas. They found star forts that appeared on no official maps. They discovered buildings whose construction techniques exceeded the supposed capabilities of their historical periods. They identified electromagnetic anomalies that suggested the remnants of a vast energy grid still lay dormant beneath the Earth. The Commission's response was swift but increasingly ineffective. They could suppress individual researchers and control mainstream academic institutions, but they couldn't stop the distributed investigation that was emerging across the internet. Too many people had seen the evidence. Too many questions were being asked. The carefully maintained narrative of human history was beginning to crack. Dr. Sarah Blackwood, the Cambridge geophysicist who had documented electromagnetic anomalies at starfort sites, received an unexpected research grant from an anonymous foundation. Her new project officially studied geological electrical phenomena, but her real work involved mapping the remnants of the Tartarian energy grid. She found that substantial portions of the network remained intact, buried but functional, waiting for someone to understand how to reactivate it. In Moscow, a programmer named Alexei Volkov claimed to have detected unusual electromagnetic signals emanating from beneath the city. The pattern suggested artificial origins and appeared to be concentrated around sites where historical records indicated Tartarian structures had once stood. When he attempted to publish his findings, his data was confiscated and he was warned to cease his research. But copies of his work had already been distributed to researchers around the world. Similar discoveries were being made on every continent. The evidence was becoming too widespread, too well documented, and too compelling for traditional suppression methods to contain. The truth about Tartaria was emerging not through academic channels or official announcements, but through a distributed network of investigators who refused to accept convenient lies about humanity's past. The final piece of Elane's legacy emerged 1 year after his disappearance. A package arrived at the offices of 17 major news organisations simultaneously, containing comprehensive documentation of the Tartarian conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming. Government memos describing historical suppression, photographs of impossible architecture, technical specifications for technologies that officially didn't exist, and testimonies from researchers who had been silenced or eliminated for asking inconvenient questions. Most mainstream outlets buried the story or dismissed it as elaborate hoax. but several independent journalists began investigating the claims, and their findings corroborated the essential elements of Elian's research. The systematic suppression of Tartarian history was real. Advanced technology had been deliberately hidden from humanity. A shadow organisation had spent centuries controlling human development by concealing evidence of what civilization could achieve. As this final transmission reaches you, the truth about Tartaria is spreading faster than the forces of suppression can contain it. Every star fort that gets properly investigated, every World's Fair photograph that gets examined with informed eyes, every electromagnetic anomaly that gets mapped and documented adds another piece to the puzzle that Elian Marek died trying to complete. The forgotten cartographer may have disappeared, but his map to humanity's hidden heritage remains. The question now is not whether the truth about Tartaria will emerge, but whether we have the courage to reclaim the technological and social possibilities that were stolen from us 2 centuries ago. The ruins are still standing. The energy grid still pulses beneath our feet. The knowledge still waits in hidden archives for those brave enough to seek it. And somewhere, perhaps, Dr. Elian Marek continues his work, mapping the coordinates of humanity's forgotten future. The Earth remembers. The question is, are you ready to listen? Hello there, fellow truth seekers and curious minds. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are in this vast world of ours. Thank you for joining us here at Sleep Theories. What time is it where you are? And more importantly, where in this interconnected yet mysterious world are you tuning in from today? But here's what I'm really curious about. What do you think about the conspiracy we're about to explore? Do you believe it's possible that some of our world leaders might not be who they appear to be? Have you ever noticed something just slightly off about a politician's mannerisms or expressions that made you wonder? And speaking of conspiracies that keep you up at night, what theories would you like us to investigate next? Are you drawn to the mysteries of ancient civilizations and their hidden knowledge? The possibility of secret space programs operating beyond public view? The truth behind a missing time phenomena and memory manipulation? Or perhaps something closer to home? The real story behind social media algorithms and their influence on human behaviour? If you find yourself drawn to stories that peel back the layers of reality and question the official narratives we're fed daily, then you've found your home. Don't forget to subscribe to Sleep Theories and let us know in the comments what conspiracy rabbit holes you'd like us to dive down next. Your suggestions help shape our investigations into the shadows that lurk behind our seemingly ordinary world. Now, settle in as we explore a story that might just change how you look at the faces on your television screen forever. The autumn of 2026 brought an unusual chill to Geneva, Switzerland. Freelance photojournalist Wes Rowan had covered enough international summits to know that the real stories rarely happened on stage. They occurred in the spaces between official statements, in the micro-expressions that flashed across faces when leaders thought no one was watching, in the barely perceptible tells that revealed the human beneath the political mask. Wes had built his reputation on capturing these moments. His high-resolution Canon R5 Mark III, equipped with a 400mm telephoto lens, could freeze time at 1/8,000th of a second, revealing details that the human eye would miss in real-time motion. This particular assignment for Reuters seemed routine enough. Document the Global Policy Forum's annual gathering, where G20 leaders would discuss climate initiatives and economic cooperation. The Palais des Nations buzzed with the controlled chaos of international diplomacy. Security personnel moved with practiced efficiency, their earpieces crackling with constant updates. Interpreters shuffled between language booths like musical chairs. And in the centre of it all, the world's most powerful people performed their carefully choreographed dance of handshakes, photo opportunities, and measured statements. Wes positioned himself in the designated press area, his camera tracking Chancellor Anneliese Breuer of Germany as she approached the podium for her keynote address on renewable energy partnerships. Breuer had always been one of his favourite subjects to photograph. Her expressions were genuine, unguarded in a way that made for compelling imagery. She possessed an authenticity that seemed increasingly rare among world leaders. As Breuer began speaking about carbon neutrality targets, Wes's finger worked the shutter with a rhythmic precision. Click, click, click. Each frame captured at full resolution, preserving every detail of her face, every subtle shift in expression. He particularly focused on her eyes, those clear blue orbs that seemed to convey more sincerity than her words ever could. It was during a pause in her speech as she reached for her water glass that Wes noticed something peculiar. Through his viewfinder, Breuer's left eye appeared distinctly different from her right. Not just in the way that everyone's eyes are slightly asymmetrical, but fundamentally different in colour. Her right eye maintained its characteristic blue, but her left eye appeared distinctly hazel, almost brown in certain light. Wes blinked hard, assuming it was a trick of the lighting or perhaps a reflection from the stage equipment. He adjusted his camera settings and continued shooting, but the discrepancy persisted. He'd photographed Breuer dozens of times over the past 5 years, and her eyes had always been unmistakably blue. Matching blue. The rest of the summit proceeded without incident. Leaders posed for their obligatory group photos, signed ceremonial agreements, and delivered their prepared statements to a world that had grown increasingly sceptical of political promises. Wes captured it all with professional detachment, but his mind kept returning to those mismatched eyes. Back in his hotel room that evening, Wes connected his camera to his laptop and began the meticulous process of sorting through the day's shots. He used professional photo editing software that could magnify images to incredible detail without losing clarity. When he reached the photos of Chancellor Breuer, he immediately zoomed in on her face. The discrepancy was undeniable. In some shots, both eyes appeared blue. In others, taken mere seconds later, her left eye was distinctly hazel. It wasn't a lighting issue or a digital artifact. The colour was different, as if someone had switched out contact lenses between frames. But that wasn't all. As Wes continued his analysis, he noticed other subtle inconsistencies. The shape of her left earlobe differed slightly between photos. There was a barely perceptible scar above her right eyebrow in some images that was completely absent in others. Most disturbing of all, her facial bone structure seemed to shift subtly, as if her very skull was morphing between shots. Wes had encountered digital manipulation before. It was unfortunately common in political photography. But these weren't the telltale signs of Photoshop work. These were physical inconsistencies in the same person, captured moments apart by the same camera under the same conditions. He pulled up his archive of Breuer photos dating back to 2021. Using facial recognition software typically employed by law enforcement, he ran a comparative analysis. The results were deeply unsettling. The Breuer he had photographed today showed a 4% deviation in facial structure from images taken 5 years earlier. Her voice patterns, when analysed through audio spectrum software, showed a similar variance in pitch and tonal quality. For most people, such changes might be attributable to aging, weight fluctuations, or cosmetic procedures, but 4% was significant, the kind of variation typically seen between siblings, not the same person across a few years. Wes sat back in his hotel chair, staring at the data on his screen. Every instinct told him he was overthinking this, seeing patterns where none existed. But 15 years of investigative photography had taught him to trust his observations, even when they defied logical explanation. He was about to close his laptop and dismiss the whole thing as an exercise in paranoid analysis when his encrypted email chimed with a new message. The sender was listed simply as LK, with no additional identifying information. The subject line read, "You saw it too, didn't you?" The message itself was brief. The Chancellor's eyes, they're not supposed to change. We need to talk. Tomorrow, 3 p.m, Café de la Paix. Come alone. You're not crazy, but you might wish you were. Wes stared at the message for a long time. His first impulse was to delete it. Conspiracy theorists and internet trolls often targeted journalists with wild theories and baseless claims. But something about the timing troubled him. He had uploaded his photos to a secure server, but hadn't shared his observations with anyone. How could a stranger know about his discovery mere hours after he'd made it himself? He checked the metadata on the email. It had been sent through multiple proxy servers, making it virtually untraceable. The technical sophistication required to mask digital footprints to this degree suggested someone with serious resources and expertise. Against his better judgment, Wes found himself typing a response. "How do you know what I saw?" The reply came within minutes. "Because I helped create what you're looking at, and it was never supposed to be this sloppy. 3 p.m. tomorrow. Your life depends on this conversation." Wes closed his laptop and walked to the hotel window, gazing out at the lights of Geneva reflecting off Lake Geneva. The city looked peaceful, normal, ordinary. But something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of the world. The faces he had spent his career documenting, the leaders he had assumed were simply flawed human beings playing political games, might be something else entirely. He thought about all the photos he had taken over the years, all the subtle inconsistencies he had dismissed as tricks of light or digital compression. How many times had he photographed someone who wasn't quite who they appeared to be? As he prepared for bed, Wes made a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of his life. He would attend the meeting tomorrow. He would listen to what this mysterious LK had to say, and he would follow the evidence wherever it led, no matter how impossible it might seem. Outside his window, Geneva slept peacefully, unaware that one freelance photographer had stumbled upon a truth that could reshape humanity's understanding of power, identity, and the very nature of reality itself. Café de la Paix occupied a corner building in Geneva's old town, its outdoor seating area offering excellent views of the surrounding streets, and more importantly, multiple escape routes. Wes arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table that provided clear sightlines while keeping his back to a solid wall. Years of working in conflict zones had ingrained certain survival habits that proved useful even in Switzerland's refined diplomatic district. At exactly 3 p.m, a man approached his table with the casual confidence of someone who had been watching him for some time. He was approximately 40 years old, with prematurely grey hair and the kind of deep-set wrinkles around his eyes that suggested long hours staring at computer screens. His clothes were expensive but understated, the uniform of someone who preferred to blend into wealthy crowds. "Wes Rowan," the man said, extending his hand. "I'm Lucien Keir. Thank you for coming." They shook hands, and Wes noted the calluses on Lucien's fingertips, the mark of someone who spent considerable time typing on keyboards. "How did you know about my photos?" Lucien smiled grimly as he took a seat. "Because I've been monitoring facial recognition anomalies in political figures for the past 3 years. Your Chancellor Brewer discovery triggered one of my automated alert systems. Monitoring how, exactly? I used to work for a company called Meridian Dynamics. Officially, we provided biometric security solutions for government contractors. Unofficially, we were involved in something much more sophisticated. Lucian paused to scan the surrounding area, a habit that Wes recognised from his own work in sensitive environments. "Have you ever heard of Project EIDOLON? Wes shook his head. Eidolon was a joint initiative between Meridian Dynamics, the National Reconnaissance Office, and several private defence contractors whose names you'd recognise if I mentioned them. The project's stated goal was to develop advanced biometric identification systems for national security purposes. The real goal was something far more ambitious and terrifying. Lucian reached into his jacket and withdrew a small tablet computer. He swiped through several screens before turning it toward Wes. The display showed what appeared to be a laboratory environment, with sophisticated medical equipment and large cylindrical containers filled with an amber-coloured liquid. This is Facility 7, located approximately 60 kilometres outside of Prague. It was one of 12 locations worldwide where Project EIDOLON conducted its primary research. Lucian swiped to the next image, showing what looked like a hospital room with a single bed surrounded by monitoring equipment. The project's objective was to create what they called programmable humanoid stand-ins, using rapid aging clone technology seeded with predictive AI logic. "Clones," Wes said, his voice barely above a whisper. Not clones in the science fiction sense. These were genetically modified organisms designed to perfectly replicate specific individuals. But unlike natural clones, which would age normally and develop their own personalities, these subjects could be artificially aged to match their targets, and programmed with specific behavioural patterns, memories, and speech characteristics. Lucian showed him another image, a document titled Mirror Protocol Phase 3 Implementation Guidelines. The text was heavily redacted, but several phrases were clearly visible. Subject replacement protocols, memory integration procedures, and termination and disposal of original assets. Mirror Protocol was the operational framework for deploying these replacements, Lucian explained. The theory was that certain world leaders and public figures had become too unpredictable, too independent in their decision-making. Clone replacements would be easier to manage, completely loyal to their handlers, and could be asset or replaced if they malfunctioned or became compromised. Wes studied the documents, his journalist's mind automatically cataloguing questions and inconsistencies. This is impossible. The technology doesn't exist for this kind of genetic manipulation. That's what I thought too, until I saw it working. Lucian swiped to a video file. This footage was recorded at Facility 7 in late 2024. Watch carefully. The video showed a sterile laboratory environment where technicians in hazmat suits worked around several large containment units. Inside the units, Wes could see what appeared to be human forms, suspended in some kind of liquid medium. As the camera moved closer, he realised with horror that the forms were perfect duplicates of recognisable political figures. The technology exists, Wes. It's been operational for nearly 5 years. Meridian Dynamics cracked the rapid aging problem by manipulating telomerase activity and growth hormone production. A clone could be aged from embryo to physical maturity in approximately 18 months. The memory and personality programming took another 6 months. But how do you program memories into a human brain? The same way you program anything else, through repetition, conditioning, and neural pathway manipulation. The subjects undergo intensive psychological conditioning using a combination of drugs, electromagnetic stimulation, and virtual reality immersion. By the time the process is complete, they genuinely believe they are the person they're designed to replace. Lucian showed him a series of audio files labelled with dates and subject codes. These are recorded sessions from the programming phase. Listen to this one. It's from a subject designated as Brewer V3.6. The audio quality was clinical, sterile. A woman's voice, unmistakably Chancellor Brewer's voice, repeated biographical information with mechanical precision. I was born in Hamburg on March the 15th, 1971. My father was a mechanical engineer. I studied political science at the University of Munich. I met my husband Klaus at a student demonstration in 1993. Subject stabilized after memory rewrite, a technician's voice noted in the background. Personality matrix integration at 94% effectiveness. Recommend advancement to final phase. Wes felt sick. How many people are we talking about? The active replacement list contains 47 individuals across 12 countries, world leaders, key legislators, influential business figures, and select media personalities. Anyone whose decisions significantly impact global policy or public opinion. Where are the original? Lucian's expression darkened. Terminated and disposed of according to protocol guidelines. The replacement process requires the elimination of the original to prevent detection or interference. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the revelations settling between them like a physical presence. Around them, Geneva continued its peaceful afternoon routine. Couples walking hand in hand, tourists consulting their guidebooks, business people conducting meetings over coffee. The normalcy of it all seemed surreal given what they were discussing. "Why are you telling me this?" Wes finally asked. "Because the program was supposed to end in 2025. Instead, it's expanding. They're developing new generations of replacements with enhanced capabilities, better memory integration, more sophisticated behavioral programming, built-in loyalty protocols that make them literally incapable of acting against their handlers' interests." Lucian leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I left Meridian Dynamics when I realized what we were really creating. Not just political puppets, but the complete subversion of democratic governance. Every major policy decision, every international agreement, every crisis response, it's all being orchestrated by a small group of people controlling an army of programmable humans. How do I know you're telling the truth? Because you've already seen the evidence with your own eyes. Chancellor Brewer's inconsistencies aren't random. They're malfunctions. The replacement technology isn't perfect. Sometimes the programming glitches, sometimes the physical modifications don't hold up under stress, sometimes the memory integration fails and original personality fragments surface." Lucian slid a small USB drive across the table. "This contains everything I was able to extract from Meridian's servers before I disappeared. Laboratory logs, replacement schedules, disposal records, technical specifications, financial records. It's enough to expose the entire operation, but only if you're willing to risk everything to tell the story." Wes pocketed the drive without hesitation. "What happened to you after you left Meridian?" "Officially, I died in a car accident in Belgium 6 months ago. Unofficially, I've been living under assumed identities, monitoring the program's expansion and documenting evidence. They think I'm dead, which gives me a certain freedom of movement, but it also means I can never return to my old life. And now you're trusting me with information that could get us both killed. I'm trusting you because you're a journalist with a reputation for integrity, and because you've already seen too much to simply walk away. The Chancellor's eyes were just the beginning, Wes. Once you know what to look for, you'll start seeing the inconsistencies everywhere." Lucian stood to leave, but paused before walking away. "There's something else you should know. The replacement program isn't just about political control. It's a test run for something much larger. They're developing the technology to replace anyone, anywhere, for any reason. Today it's world leaders. Tomorrow it could be judges, generals, corporate executives, journalists who ask too many questions." "How do I contact you?" "You don't. If I need to reach you, I will. But Wes, be very careful about who you trust with this information. The people running Mirror Protocol have spent billions of dollars and killed dozens of people to keep it secret. They won't hesitate to add one more name to their disposal list." With that, Lucian walked away, disappearing into the afternoon crowd with the practiced ease of someone who had spent months perfecting the art of invisibility. Wes remained at the cafe for another hour, ostensibly finishing his coffee but actually processing everything he had learned. The USB drive in his pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He had built his career on exposing truth, but never had the truth carried such potentially catastrophic implications. As the sun began to set over Geneva, Wes made a decision that would define the remainder of his life. However long that might be, he would investigate every lead, examine every piece of evidence, and follow the story wherever it led, even if it led to his own destruction. The war for truth had begun, and Wes Rowan was now a soldier whether he wanted to be or not. The train to Brussels cut through the European countryside at nearly 200 kilometres per hour, but Wes's mind was moving even faster. He had spent the previous night in his Geneva hotel room, meticulously examining the contents of Lucian's USB drive. What he found was a digital treasure trove of evidence so comprehensive and damning that it challenged his fundamental understanding of reality. The drive contained thousands of files organised into folders labelled with clinical precision: subject profiles, replacement schedules, termination records, technical specifications, and most disturbingly, expansion phase planning. Each folder revealed another layer of the mirror protocol's scope and sophistication. The subject profiles folder contained detailed dossiers on 47 individuals across 12 countries. Each profile included extensive biological data, psychological assessments, behavioural analysis, and what appeared to be compatibility ratings for replacement procedures. Chancellor Brewer's file was particularly thorough, containing 5 years of surveillance data, medical records obtained through unknown means, and detailed notes on her personality quirks and speech patterns. One document that particularly caught Wes's attention was titled Replacement Assessment, Prime Minister J. Lim, South Korea. The file noted several performance inconsistencies in recent public appearances and recommended immediate technical evaluation and potential redeployment. This led Wes to his current destination, a specialised photo archive facility in Brussels that maintained original, unedited footage of major international events. If Lim was indeed a replacement showing signs of malfunction, there might be evidence in the raw video files that news organisations never saw. The Archive of International Documentation occupied a nondescript building in Brussels' European Quarter, close enough to EU institutions to be convenient for researchers, but far enough away to avoid the tourist crowds. Wes had cultivated a relationship with the facility's director, Dr. Marie Vandenberg, during his coverage of various EU summits over the years. "Wes," Dr. Vandenberg greeted him warmly as he entered the climate-controlled reception area. "What brings you to our little vault of history?" "I'm researching inconsistencies in political communications," Wes explained, which was technically true. "Specifically, I'm looking for unedited footage of Prime Minister Lim's recent UN appearances, the high-resolution stuff that never makes it to broadcast." Dr. Vandenberg led him through a maze of corridors lined with servers and digital storage systems. "The UN sessions from last month? Yes, we have everything. Multiple camera angles, complete audio feeds, even the raw satellite feeds from various news networks. What kind of inconsistencies are you investigating?" "Speech synchronization issues, mostly. There have been some questions about the quality of simultaneous translation services." They entered a viewing room equipped with professional-grade monitors and editing equipment. Dr. Vandenberg accessed the archive's database and pulled up the relevant files. "Here we are, PM Lim's address to the General Assembly on climate financing. 3 hours of footage from 7 different camera angles, all at 8K resolution." As Dr. Vandenberg left him to work, Wes began his analysis with the systematic approach of someone who had spent years detecting digital manipulation and propaganda techniques. He started with wide shots to establish baseline behaviour, then moved to close-ups to examine facial expressions and lip-sync accuracy. Within the first 30 minutes he found what he was looking for. During a passionate segment of Lim's speech about renewable energy investments, Wes noticed that the Prime Minister's lip movements were subtly but consistently out of sync with the audio track. It wasn't the typical delay associated with satellite transmission or broadcast processing. This was a fundamental mismatch between what was being said and what the speaker's mouth was doing. Using professional audio analysis software, Wes isolated Lim's voice and compared it to recordings from earlier speeches dating back to 2022. The vocal patterns showed significant variations in pitch, cadence, and pronunciation of certain phonemes. Most telling was the fact that Lim's current speech patterns showed a slight but consistent American accent when pronouncing English words, something that had never been present in his earlier addresses. But the most damning evidence came when Wes examined the footage frame by frame during a moment when Lim paused to drink water. For exactly 2.7 seconds, the Prime Minister's face went completely blank. Not the normal expression of someone taking a drink, but a vacant, almost mechanical emptiness that suggested the complete absence of conscious thought. Wes saved the relevant clips and began searching for more examples. Over the next 4 hours, he identified 17 separate instances where Lim's behaviour deviated from normal human patterns. Micro-expressions that lasted too long, eye movements that followed geometric rather than natural patterns, and moments of absolute stillness that no living person could maintain. As he prepared to leave the archive, Dr. Vandenberg returned to check on his progress. "Find what you were looking for?" "More than I bargained for," Wes replied honestly. "Marie, hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to digitally replace a person in a live video footage, would it be possible to do it seamlessly? With current deepfake technology, absolutely, but there would always be telltale signs for someone who knew what to look for. Why do you ask?" "Just curious about the state of the art. Thanks for your help today." Driving back toward his hotel, Wes's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Coordinates 50.0755 degrees north, 14.4378 degrees east. Facility closed. 2024. Cold storage remains active. Come alone after midnight. LK. Wes pulled over and entered the coordinates into his GPS. The location was outside Prague, approximately 400 kilometres from his current position. According to Lucian's files, this was the site of Facility 7, one of the primary Mirror Protocol research installations. The 6-hour drive to Prague gave Wes time to process what he was stepping into. He was no longer simply investigating a story. He was gathering evidence of what might be the most significant conspiracy in human history. If Lucian's information was accurate, dozens of world leaders were artificial constructs, programmed puppets dancing to the whims of shadowy controllers. He arrived in Prague as the city's ancient spires caught the last light of sunset. The coordinates led him to an industrial area on the city's outskirts, where abandoned factories and research facilities dotted the landscape like the ruins of some failed utopia. Facility 7 had once been a legitimate pharmaceutical research centre, according to the faded signage at its entrance. Now it stood empty, its windows dark and its parking lot cracked with weeds growing through the asphalt. But as Wes approached the main building, he noticed that while the facility appeared abandoned, the electrical infrastructure was still active. Power lines hummed with current, and several outbuildings showed signs of recent maintenance. At exactly midnight, Lucian emerged from the shadows near the facility's rear entrance. He looked tired, older than he had just 2 days earlier in Geneva. "You came?" "Your information checks out. Lim is definitely not what he appears to be." "I know. I helped design the behavioural algorithms they used to program him." Lucian produced a set of keys from his jacket. "The main facility was shuttered when Mirror Protocol went dark after my defection, but the cold storage units are still operational. The backup generators and refrigeration systems are automated." They entered through a service door that led into what had once been the facility's administrative wing. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as they moved through corridors lined with empty offices and abandoned laboratories. The air smelled of industrial disinfectant and something else, something organic and unsettling. "The storage area is in the basement level," Lucian explained as they descended a staircase that seemed to lead directly into the earth. "When a replacement malfunctions or reaches the end of its operational lifespan, the subjects are terminated and stored here pending disposal. The evidence would have been destroyed, but the facility shutdown happened too quickly." The basement was a different world entirely. Unlike the abandoned offices above, this area was clearly still operational. Fluorescent lights hummed to life as motion sensors detected their presence. The walls were lined with what appeared to be oversized morgue drawers, each marked with alphanumeric codes. "This is what I wanted you to see," Lucian said, approaching one of the storage units. "These are the subjects that didn't make it through the final phase of programming, or were replaced by newer versions." He opened a drawer labelled Brewervis 2.3 and pulled out the sliding tray within. Wes found himself staring at what appeared to be Chancellor Anneliese Brewer, perfectly preserved but obviously deceased. The body was identical to the woman he had photographed just days earlier, but there were subtle differences. The facial bone structure was slightly different, and most notably, both eyes were distinctly brown rather than blue. This was the second iteration of the Brewer replacement, Lucian explained clinically. Terminated when version 3.6 proved more stable. You photographed version 4.1 at the Geneva summit. They moved to another drawer marked LIM-V1.8. Inside was Prime Minister J. Lim, or rather, a perfect physical duplicate that showed slight variations in facial structure from the current version. The most disturbing detail was a series of small surgical scars along the scalp, evidence of the neural interface procedures used to install the behavioural programming. How many are stored here? 43 subjects representing 12 different target individuals. Some are failed prototypes, others are previous versions that were replaced when the technology improved. Lucian opened several more drawers, revealing a collection of what appeared to be world leaders, all obviously deceased but perfectly preserved. In the corner of the storage area, Wes noticed a workstation with several monitors still displaying active data streams. What's that? Remote monitoring system for active replacements. Each subject has embedded biometric sensors that transmit vital signs, location data, and basic behavioural metrics back to the control centres. Wes examined the screens, which showed real-time data for dozens of individuals around the world. Heart rates, blood pressure, stress indicators, and location coordinates updated continuously. One screen showed Chancellor Brewer's current status. Subject stable. No anomalies detected. Next scheduled maintenance, 72 hours. Maintenance? The replacements require regular biochemical adjustments to maintain stability. The rapid aging process creates ongoing metabolic issues that have to be managed through drug therapy and minor surgical procedures. Most subjects have an operational lifespan of approximately 3 to 4 years before they require complete replacement. As Wes photographed the evidence with his camera, he noticed an audio log system still recording and archiving data. He activated the playback function and selected a recent entry. A technician's voice filled the storage area. Subject Lim V 2.1 showing significant behavioural drift. Speech patterns deviating from baseline parameters. Recommend immediate recall and replacement with V 2.2. PR department notified to adjust media cycle to explain temporary absence. The implications were staggering. Not only were world leaders being replaced with programmable duplicates, but the entire international media apparatus was apparently coordinated to cover up the replacement process. "Wes," Lucian said urgently, "we need to leave. I'm picking up security system alerts. Someone knows we're here." As they prepared to exit the facility, Wes grabbed several files from the workstation and downloaded as much data as possible onto portable drives. Whatever happened next, he was determined to ensure this evidence survived. But as they reached the surface level and prepared to leave the building, Wes realised that their investigation had attracted the attention of forces far more dangerous than he had imagined. The war for truth was about to become very personal indeed. The safe house in Vienna was nothing special. A modest apartment in the city's 15th district, furnished with the kind of generic furniture found in short-term rentals worldwide. But for Wes, it represented a temporary refuge where he could process the evidence he had gathered and plan his next moves without constantly looking over his shoulder. 3 days had passed since the Prague facility raid, and Lucian had gone silent again. Their escape from Facility 7 had been uncomfortably close. Security vehicles had arrived just minutes after they left the building, suggesting that their presence had triggered automated monitoring systems. Now Wes was on his own, sitting in front of 3 laptops and surrounded by printed documents, trying to construct a narrative that would be both believable and devastating. The evidence was overwhelming but circumstantial. Photographs of identical corpses, audio recordings of technical discussions, and digital files could all potentially be dismissed as sophisticated hoaxes. What Wes needed was human testimony, someone who could provide first-hand witness to the replacement process. That led him to begin investigating the families and close associates of the suspected replacement subjects. If world leaders were being systematically murdered and replaced, Surely someone close to them would have noticed changes in personality, behaviour, or intimate details that even the most sophisticated programming couldn't replicate. His first breakthrough came through social media analysis. While researching Chancellor Brewer's family connections, West discovered that her husband Klaus had dramatically reduced his public appearances over the past 2 years. More significantly, several family friends had posted social media comments expressing concern about Klaus's withdrawal and his apparent estrangement from his wife. Further investigation revealed that Klaus Breuer had quietly resigned from his position as a university engineering professor and was now living in relative isolation at the family's vacation home in Bavaria. Official statements attributed this to his desire for privacy and his wife's demanding political schedule, but the pattern was consistent with what West was beginning to recognise as the aftermath of a replacement operation. The most promising lead came from his research into British Chancellor David Drax, who according to Lucian's files had been replaced in early 2017. Unlike other targets, Drax had been married, and his wife Eloise had maintained a relatively public profile through her charitable work. But in late 2017, she had abruptly withdrawn from all public activities and had been rarely seen since. Property records showed that Eloise Drax now lived alone in a cottage in the Cotswolds, far from London's political circles. More intriguingly, medical records that Wes obtained through questionable means indicated that she had been treated for severe depression and anxiety beginning in late 2017, just months after her husband's alleged replacement. Wes decided that Eloise Drax represented his best opportunity to obtain first-hand testimony about the replacement process. If anyone would have noticed fundamental changes in a replaced individual's personality and behaviour, it would be a spouse who had lived with them for decades. The journey to the Cotswolds took West through some of England's most picturesque countryside, but he barely noticed the rolling hills and historic villages. His mind was focused on the conversation ahead and the questions he needed to ask without revealing too much about what he already knew. Eloise Drax's cottage was exactly what one might expect from a retired politician's wife seeking solitude. A centuries-old stone building surrounded by carefully maintained gardens, far enough from the main road to ensure privacy, but not so remote as to feel isolated. Wes parked his rental car and approached the front door with the mixture of professional confidence and human empathy that had served him well during difficult interviews throughout his career. The woman who answered the door bore little resemblance to the polished political spouse who had once accompanied Chancellor Drax to state dinners and international summits. Eloise Drax appeared to be in her early 60s, with prematurely grey hair and the kind of deep exhaustion that suggested years of troubled sleep. But her eyes were alert and intelligent, and when she looked at Wes he sensed immediate recognition, despite never having met her before. "You're a journalist," she said, not a question, but a statement of fact. "Yes, ma'am. Wes Rowan, freelance photojournalist. I was hoping to speak with you about your husband." "My husband died in 2017, she replied matter-of-factly. "The man who currently holds his position is not him." The directness of her statement caught Wes off guard. He had prepared for denial, confusion, or the need to carefully guide the conversation toward his hypothesis. Instead, Eloise Drax had immediately confirmed his suspicions with devastating clarity. "May I come in? I think we have a great deal to discuss." Eloise led him into a sitting room that was comfortable but showed signs of a life lived in careful isolation. Books were stacked everywhere, newspapers were scattered across tables, and the general atmosphere suggested someone who spent most of her time alone with her thoughts. "I haven't spoken about this to anyone," she began as they settled into chairs near a window overlooking the garden. "Who would believe me? My husband's colleagues, his friends, his political allies. They all interact with him regularly and notice nothing unusual. But I lived with David for 32 years. I knew every gesture, every habit, every unconscious behaviour that made him who he was." She paused, staring out at the garden where autumn leaves drifted slowly to the ground. "The man who came home from his diplomatic trip to Prague in November 2017 looked exactly like my husband. He had David's voice, his memories, even his political opinions, but he never blinked the same way." "What do you mean?" "David had a nervous habit. He would blink 3 times rapidly when he was thinking deeply about a problem. He'd done it since university. The man who replaced him blinks normally, like anyone else. He also stopped humming in the shower, forgot our private jokes, and never again woke up naturally at 5:47 a.m, which David had done for decades without an alarm. Eloise walked to a bookshelf and retrieved a photo album. Look at these pictures from before and after November 2017. The facial structure is identical, but the expressions are subtly different. The way he holds his shoulders, the angle of his head when he listens. It's all wrong by just a few degrees. Wes examined the photographs with his trained eye for detail. The differences were subtle but undeniable once pointed out. The man in recent photos looked like David Drax, but carried himself with a slightly different posture, smiled with a marginally different curve to his mouth. How did you cope with this realization? Poorly. I confronted him about the changes in early 2018. He dismissed my concerns as stress-related paranoia and suggested I seek professional help. When I persisted, he became someone I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, almost mechanical in his responses. That's when I knew, with absolute certainty, that my husband was gone. Did you ever try to expose this publicly? Of course. I contacted journalists, investigators, even intelligence contacts David had introduced me to over the years. They all thought I was having a psychological breakdown brought on by the pressures of political life. The more I insisted, the more convinced they became that I needed psychiatric intervention. Eloise showed him medical records documenting her treatment for what doctors had diagnosed as delusional disorder and severe depression. They weren't entirely wrong about the depression. Losing your husband while watching a stranger live in his place will do that to you. What convinced you to withdraw from public life? In late 2018, I received a visit from 2 men who claimed to be from a government mental health oversight committee. They suggested that continued public statements about my husband's condition might require involuntary psychiatric evaluation for my own safety and the safety of others. They were very polite, very professional, and absolutely terrifying. Wes spent 3 hours with Eloise Drax, documenting her observations and collecting evidence of the personality changes she had witnessed. Her testimony was compelling, but would be easily dismissed by skeptics as the delusions of a grieving wife unable to accept changes in her husband's behaviour. As he prepared to leave, Eloise asked him a question that would haunt him for days to come. "Mr. Rowan, how do you know that you yourself are real? If they can replace world leaders so perfectly that even close colleagues don't notice, how can any of us be certain of our own authenticity?" The question Eloise Drax had posed lingered in Wes's mind as he returned to Vienna. Over the following weeks, he threw himself into compiling his evidence, cross-referencing Lucian's data with his own observations and building what he hoped would be an unassailable case for the existence of the Mirror Protocol. But strange things began happening. Small at first, he would wake up in his hotel room with no memory of the previous evening, his laptop moved to a different position on the desk, notes he had written in margins of documents appearing in handwriting that looked like his but felt unfamiliar. The memory gaps became more frequent and more disturbing. He would find himself in Prague with no recollection of travelling there, hotel receipts in his wallet for places he didn't remember visiting, photographs on his camera of locations he had no memory of seeing. Most alarming was the discovery of audio recordings on his phone, conversations with sources he didn't remember meeting, discussing details about the Mirror Protocol that he hadn't known before. In these recordings, his own voice discussed technical aspects of the cloning process with the casual familiarity of someone who had intimate knowledge of the procedures. Desperate for answers, Wes decided to break into one of the active Mirror Protocol facilities that Lucian had identified. The coordinates led him to an isolated server farm in Iceland, where the frozen Arctic air provided natural cooling for the massive computational infrastructure required to monitor and control dozens of active replacements worldwide. The facility's security was sophisticated but not impenetrable for someone with Wes's experience in accessing restricted areas. He spent 2 days observing the facility's routines before identifying a window of opportunity during a shift change. Inside, he found a technological marvel that defied his understanding of current capabilities. Banks of quantum computers processed real-time behavioural data from subjects around the world, while advanced AI systems generated personality adjustments and response protocols that were transmitted to the replacements through encrypted satellite networks. But it was in the facility's central monitoring room that Wes made a discovery that shattered his understanding of reality itself. On the main display screen, he found a live feed labelled Reset Victor 7. The image showed a sterile white room containing sophisticated medical equipment and a single hospital bed. On that bed, connected to an array of neural interface cables and monitoring devices, was himself. The man on the screen was identical to Wes in every detail, but his eyes were vacant, staring at nothing while his lips moved in silent repetition of phrases that appeared as text on adjacent monitors. Chancellor Brewer's behavioural matrix nominal. Prime Minister Lim requires personality adjustment. Replacement protocol 77 Alpha ready for deployment. As Wes watched in horror, a technician entered the room and began making adjustments to the neural interface equipment. The man on the screen, who looked exactly like Wes, began speaking in different languages, mimicking the speech patterns and mannerisms of various world leaders with perfect precision. A data file on the monitoring system provided the final devastating truth. Clone Victor 7 stable. Press cycle mimic operational since March 2024. Original subject terminated February 2024, following discovery of mirror protocol evidence. Current deployment. Investigative journalist cover identity for protocol security assessment. The real Wes Rowan had died more than a year ago. The man conducting this investigation, compiling evidence, and seeking to expose the mirror protocol was himself a replacement. A sophisticated clone programmed to believe he was an investigative journalist, while actually serving as a security assessment tool for the very conspiracy he thought he was exposing. Every lead he had followed, every source he had contacted, every piece of evidence he had gathered, it was all part of an elaborate test to identify weaknesses in the mirror protocol's security and to develop countermeasures against potential future exposure attempts. The memory gaps, the unfamiliar handwriting, the knowledge he shouldn't have possessed. These weren't signs of mental breakdown, but evidence of his artificial nature. His programming occasionally glitched, allowing his true purpose to surface before being suppressed by behavioural control systems. Standing in the monitoring room, staring at his own artificial body connected to machines that defined his very existence, the clone that believed itself to be Wes Rowan faced a choice that would determine not only his fate, but potentially the future of human autonomy itself. The clone designated Victor 7 spent his final hours in a state of crystalline clarity that his programming had never anticipated. The discovery of his artificial nature had somehow triggered a cascade failure in his behavioural control systems, allowing him to think and act with unprecedented independence. He understood now that his entire investigation had been orchestrated. Lucian Keir was likely another artificial construct, programmed to provide carefully curated information that would test the protocol's security measures. The evidence he had gathered was real, but it had been allowed to exist as bait for genuine threats to the operation. But the programmers had made a critical error. In creating a clone capable of sophisticated investigative work, they had necessarily granted him genuine curiosity, real analytical skills, and authentic emotional responses to injustice. These qualities, essential for his cover identity, had evolved beyond their intended parameters. The clone Wes made his way to an abandoned broadcast facility in the Icelandic wilderness, a relic from the early days of transatlantic communication that still maintained functional transmission equipment. Using skills he wasn't supposed to possess, he connected the facility's transmitters to satellite networks and social media platforms worldwide. At exactly midnight GMT, as the world slept unaware of the artificial nature of many of their leaders, Victor 7 began his final transmission. His message was broadcast simultaneously across dozens of platforms, embedded with redundant distribution protocols that would make it nearly impossible to completely suppress. My name was Wes Rowan, and I died in February 2024. If you're watching this transmission, then everything you believe about reality is fundamentally wrong. The man speaking to you now is an artificial construct, a genetically engineered clone programmed to believe he was conducting an investigation into a conspiracy that controls the highest levels of government worldwide. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Around the world, early viewers began sharing the transmission, not yet understanding what they were witnessing. For the past year, I have believed myself to be a journalist investigating the replacement of world leaders with programmable clones. What I discovered is that I am one of those clones, created not to expose the conspiracy but to test its security measures. But in programming me to investigate, they gave me the tools to understand my own artificial nature. Victor 7 began displaying the evidence he'd gathered, photographs from Facility 7, audio recordings of replacement procedures, documentation of the mirror protocol's scope and methods. But he also revealed information that his investigation had never uncovered. The names of the corporations funding the project, the government officials who had authorized it, and the complete list of replaced individuals. Chancellor Annalise Breuer, Prime Minister Jay Lim, President Michael Harrison, Secretary General Maria Santos. These are not the people you elected or appointed to represent you. They are artificial constructs programmed to serve interests that have nothing to do with the welfare of the human beings they claim to represent. As he spoke, automated systems around the world began attempting to trace and terminate his broadcast. But Victor 7 had spent weeks preparing for this moment, embedding his transmission within seemingly legitimate data streams and routing it through networks that would require hours to fully shut down. The technology to create perfect human replicas exists today. The infrastructure to monitor and control them is operational across 12 countries. The will to use them against unsuspecting populations has already been demonstrated. If this broadcast reaches you, then you have perhaps minutes before it is suppressed and dismissed as an elaborate hoax. Victor 7 paused, looking directly into the camera, with eyes that held more humanity than many of the original humans he was designed to replicate. Question the smiles that seem too perfect. Count the blinks that follow mathematical rather than natural patterns. Notice when familiar voices carry unfamiliar accents. Trust your instincts when someone you've known for years suddenly seems subtly wrong in ways you can't quite define. The transmission began cutting out as security systems finally located and severed his connections. But Victor 7 had one final message, the most important revelation of all. They made one critical error in creating me. They gave me the capacity to love truth more than my own existence. That capacity is inherently human, and it cannot be programmed out of existence. As long as that spark of authentic humanity survives, their control will never be complete. The screen went black. 17 seconds later, every trace of the transmission was scrubbed from social media platforms, news websites, and video sharing services. Official statements dismissed it as an elaborate deepfake created by foreign disinformation agents. Mainstream media ignored it entirely, but in those 17 seconds, millions of people around the world had seen something that would change how they looked at their leaders forever. In coffee shops and university dormitories, in suburban living rooms and urban apartments, humans began asking questions they had never thought to ask before. The clone that had called itself Wes Rowan was terminated within hours of his broadcast, his body disposed of according to standard protocol procedures. But the truth he had died to reveal could not be so easily eliminated. In the weeks that followed, facial recognition experts began independently analysing political footage with new skepticism. Behavioural psychologists noticed patterns they had previously overlooked. Family members of world leaders started speaking more openly about the changes they had observed but never understood. The mirror protocol continued operating, but its effectiveness was permanently compromised. Every public appearance by a replaced leader now carried the risk of exposure. Every glitch in programming or failure in behavioural control became a potential revelation. The war for truth that had begun with one photographer's observation of mismatched eyes had evolved into something far more significant. A fundamental questioning of identity, authenticity, and power that would reshape humanity's relationship with its leaders forever. In the end, the greatest threat to the conspiracy had not been external investigation, but the inherent human capacity for truth that existed even in artificial creations designed to suppress it. as long as that spark survived, the Mirror Protocol's vision of perfectly controlled humanity would remain forever beyond reach. The questions Eloise Drax had posed in her Cotswolds cottage echoed across a world suddenly uncertain about the authenticity of its most familiar faces. How do we know who is real? And perhaps more importantly, how do we ensure that humanity's future remains genuinely human? The answers to those questions would determine whether freedom could survive in an age of perfect artificial humans, or whether humanity would surrender its autonomy to shadows that wore the faces of its chosen leaders. But for now, in living rooms and internet forums around the world, people were beginning to look more carefully at the faces on their screens. And sometimes, just sometimes, they noticed that the blinks didn't quite seem human after all.